right, the mics are on, and generally that means that the cameras are rolling, so I will call to order the November 12, 2019 meeting of the Auburn Planning Board. Tonight we have 3 members absent. We have Kyle Pepin, who's an associate member. We have Stephen Martelli, who is away for work reasons, and unfortunately Sam Scoggin is unable to continue on as a planning board member. His own decision. I made that sound so negative. Sam has stepped down, I should say. And it's a good thing. It's because he's building his portfolio of rental properties, and he's finding himself busy with that. And so I think we all wish him best of luck. So, having mentioned the absent members, we'll start with a roll call to my left.
John Engler.
Brian Carrier.
Dan Carroll.
Evan Sear.
Matthew Duval.
Katie Boss.
So the first agenda item tonight is going to be the minutes of the October 8th, 2019 meeting. Is there a motion to accept?
Make a motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been made with a second. All those in favor? Motion passes unanimously. The next item is a public hearing. Before we begin, I spoke to city staff at our members of the board know this, but the chair meets with city staff each month prior to the meeting to go over agenda items. I felt that it was appropriate for me to recuse myself from this specific item. I don't generally recusing oneself is based on a fiduciary interest. The applicant is a family member, and albeit a distant family member, but a family member whom I really like and get to see from time to time at camp. And I think that I probably ought not to weigh in on Camp Buddies. So, having said that, I will recuse myself from this specific item. Sam Scoggin is the assistant chairperson. He has stepped down. So at this point, the board will need to appoint an acting chair, and the acting chair will go through the public hearing, beginning by explaining to the public what the process is for the public hearing, and then seeing the public hearing through. So I'm going to step away at this point.
Brian's got seniority here, right?
1 month. All right. And I'm not sure of the stuff to tell you. You should have gone right up to that point and stepped off.
Oh, I guess I should have, right?
Yeah, so this is a public hearing on this. What we're going to do is we're going to first, we'll receive a staff report on this. At that time, after we receive the staff, there'll be questions from the board to staff. After that point, we will open it up to the public for public comment. After the public comment, we will again close it, bring it back to the board for discussion, and we'll proceed at that point. So with that, Megan.
So this proposal is a special exception to construct a single-family carbon-neutral home and driveway in the Resource Protection Shoreland Zone. The ordinance actually gives the planning board the authority to approve principal structures and uses in the Resource Protection Shoreland Zone as a special exception in accordance with a number of standards that were listed in your staff report. The setback for principal structures and driveways in the Resource Protection Zone is 250 feet. With this proposal, they're proposing a 204-foot setback. There's also a portion of the property which you can see here in blue. So resource protection is green, and then blue is the stream setback, which is a 75-foot setback requirement, and they're proposing a 65-foot setback from the stream area. Aside from the shoreland zone setback requirements, the proposal meets the requirements for height, road and driveway setbacks, aside from the requested variances, stormwater runoff, vegetation removal, and erosion and sedimentation control standards that are specific to the shoreland zone. The applicants already coordinated with Auburn Water and Sewer on essential services to serve the lot. The ordinance requires that the services be limited to existing service corridors and public ways, except if the applicant can show that no reasonable alternative exists. And speaking with Auburn Water and Sewer, due to the age and capacity of the water lines on Kendall Road, which is this private road that's up in here, and the fact that a sewer line already runs across this property, we feel that there is no reasonable alternative for them to get services from anywhere else. So overall, we feel that the proposal is really a good example of something the planning board would want for a principal structure and use in the resource protection zone. The impact is minimal. So we've gone through the standards and listed them out in your memo, and we recommend that you review those and make a ruling.
Questions, staff?
I thought it was a really straightforward application. My one question, and this extends to the other applications that are put forward for tonight, is the no comment under department review. Is there any additional information that we can glean from that? Is it that they had nothing to say, that it meets all the standards necessary for their department, or just additional context would be really helpful, because this application in particular was basically no comment from everyone.
Yeah, so we, at the Development and Review Committee meetings, we ask for comments from department heads, and if we don't receive comments from them, we essentially put no comment down. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they said, I have no comment on this. It might just be that they never really provided comments to us as staff. So,
Is it at the point, so as of no news is good news?
yeah, exactly.
If there was a
That's how
problem, would
we're-
be a comment.
Yeah.
I'm
Yep.
looking at no comment as they have no issues.
Correct. Yep, we are too. So.
Further questions for staff? All right, at this point, I'll entertain a motion to open it up to the public hearing.
I'll make a motion to open it to the public hearing.
I'll second the motion.
Motion has been made and seconded to open it up. All those in favor? Okay, anybody that would like to bring forward information regarding this site plan or the plan given for us, please come to the mic, state your name and address clearly, and we're open to hearing from folks. Don't everybody rush the mic at one time. All right, seeing that nobody is coming to the mic for public hearing, I'll take a motion to close public hearing at this time.
Make a motion to close.
Motion made,
So moved.
seconded. All those in favor? Public part of this is a closed. We'll bring it back to the board at this time for discussion.
As Megan said, I think it's a great example of what we can do, and where there's no issues with anybody else, I definitely don't have any.
Anything from the applicant that they want to add, or?
Congratulations.
Yep.
We think. That's okay. Every time I have to do this, it's $5, so.
Yeah, I apologize. I haven't actually had to recuse myself as a chairperson, so the last time I had to recuse myself, I just got up and got to walk away. No, not worrying about it. All right. The next item, I will take over chairpersonship for the remainder of the meeting, as I have no need to recuse myself from any of the further items. The next item on our agenda is a public hearing preliminary plan. Preliminary plans are different from a site plan in that a preliminary plan is meant to provide an applicant with information that they would use to create a site plan or special exception plan. So this is for a proposed 3 12-unit apartment buildings and associated parking, driveways, landscaping, utilities, and other site improvements located on North River Road, parcel ID 271-101 in the Shoreland Zone and General Business zoning districts. We will conduct this public hearing the same manner as the last. We'll hear from the staff. We will ask the applicant or an agent of the applicant to come forward and speak to the board. When the board is done with that section, we will open it up to the public input section of the hearing. When that is closed, we will deliberate and then make our motions. So, is staff ready?
Like Chairman Evans said, this proposal is for the construction of 3 12-unit apartment buildings for a total of 36 units and associated parking, driveways, landscaping, utilities, and other site improvements on North River Road. The parcel is located in the General Business zoning district and also in the Shoreland Zone and the floodplain. And while there are wetlands located on the site, the project is not proposed to impact them in looking at the preliminary plan. A fill permit was reviewed and issued by staff in June for a little over 37,000 square feet of fill area at the site. And a flood hazard development permit was also applied for and approved in June of this year. In the staff report, we went through the ordinance requirements and explained how the proposal intends to address the requirements that are applicable to this project. And one thing to just note up front is that it is a preliminary plan, so it gives the planning board the opportunity to review the plan and provide feedback to the applicant on what the board would like to see in the final submission without necessarily having the pressure of making a final ruling on the proposal at the same time. When the planning board grants preliminary plan approval to a preliminary plan, the board's required to state conditions of approval, which includes specific changes the board would want to see in the final plan, as well as discuss any potential waivers. So your staff report italicizes items that staff feels should be conditions of preliminary plan approval on page 10, as well as talks about 2 potential waiver requests that should probably be included in the final plan submission. So first, the staff report goes through the shoreland zoning standards. Principal and accessory structures in the shoreland zone are required to meet a 25-foot setback from the normal high water line in the general development shoreland zone, as opposed to 100 feet in general shoreland zone and 250 feet in resource protection and 75 feet in stream setback like the proposal we just reviewed. We did recommend for clarification purposes that the 25-foot stream setback and normal high water mark be delineated on the plan so the planning board can ensure that it's out of that setback, the building, the parking areas, and the retaining wall. But we did use a scale and all of those appear to be out of the 25-foot setback. Shoreland zone also requires principal structures not to exceed 35 feet in height. And the state actually has a definition for the height of a structure, which is different from our ordinance, and it requires the vertical distance between the mean original prior to construction grade at the downhill side of the structure and the highest point of the structure, and it has a few exclusions like chimneys and those sorts of things. It does appear the buildings exceed 35 feet, but we're waiting on clarification from DEP because they may not include the general development shoreland zone area in their height requirements. So it lists out the different shoreland type of areas like limited commercial, resource protection, but it doesn't specifically say general development. So it may be that it was purposefully excluded from that. So we're just waiting to hear back from them on clarification. Shoreland zone also gets into parking areas and road driveway requirements. What's interesting, in some areas it almost contradicts the off-street parking and loading standards that the city has. So for example, the Shoreland ordinance requires a larger parking stall, 10 by 20, as opposed to 9 by 18 in the parking and loading ordinance. And as you'll see in the staff report, it doesn't really make sense to us to have a larger parking stall in the shoreland zone where there's lot coverage restrictions and we really want to limit the amount of impervious area that we have in the shoreland zone. So we just recommended defaulting to the parking and circulation standards that we use for all of the projects in the city. And we did recommend that the size of a typical parking stall be shown on as a detail sheet, as well as aisle width measurements and those sorts of things. Again, it's a preliminary plan, so I'm sure those things would be included in the final plan anyways, but just something to include in your list of conditions. And there were a few standards that we couldn't really determine based on the preliminary plan, like the slope of the road and driveway banks and grades. But looking at the site, it's generally flat anyways, so we don't expect there to be issues meeting these standards, but we just recommend further information be provided in the final plan. We also need more information on stormwater runoff and erosion and sedimentation control for the engineering department to do their review. The next section of the staff report gets into off-street parking and loading, and one of the requirements is parking lot lighting. We didn't see anything in the plans in terms of exterior lighting, so that's something that they'll have to submit for the planning board to review. There's also a requirement for some type of curbing at the head of each parking or loading stall that abuts either a structure, a side or rear lot line, sidewalk, street right-of-way, or a landscaped area. And it sounds like the applicant is proposing curbing in all of those areas. They've submitted a plan to staff that will address that part of the ordinance anyways. But something for the planning board to put in your list of conditions. There was one waiver request that we recommend the applicant submit as part of the final plan, or at least address, and that pertains to the width of the curb cuts. So they're proposing 2 curb cuts into the site, and the ordinance requires that they not exceed 20 feet in width, and each curb cut is proposed to be about 24 feet. So it might actually be advantageous for the fire department to have better access to the site. So we recommended that the applicant reach out to them and see if that's something that they would prefer, and if so, to request a waiver with their final submission to allow them to be 24 feet. Additionally, the ordinance only allows for either 1 two-way access point or 2 one-way access points to the site. And there's a couple of ways to look at this, I guess. So for example, if the applicant were going to subdivide the lot, they could potentially have 3 curb cuts in that same area. And again, the fire department may actually prefer to have two-way access points to be able to make a loop around the site, as opposed to just having 1 access point into the site. So I know that they've reached out to David O'Connell, the fire prevention officer, and waiting to hear back from him on his thoughts on that. So you may see in the final plan a couple of waiver requests. And also just pointing out site distance on the site plan as well. I know it meets the site distance requirements, but it's just something the planning board should have on the plan in case down the road somebody pulled up and was like, does this meet the site distance requirements? As far as floodplain requirements, they've already applied for a flood hazard development permit, and that was approved in June. And the ordinance actually lists 5 standards that the planning board is required to consider for proposals in the floodplain, and we've listed those in your staff report. It's the same type of review standards that you have for special exception, site plan, subdivision. It's just applicable to projects in the floodplain. One of the requirements of the subdivision ordinance is that the applicant address recreation areas and open space. And using the language in the ordinance, it would essentially require either 4 acres of recreation and open space based on the number of units proposed, and the site itself is a little over 3 acres. But the ordinance does allow for the applicant to dedicate land or fee in lieu of land to the city, and they're proposing to dedicate the area up here as a boat launch, as well as they're proposing 1.5 acres really of green space. And there's also a potential, and I don't know the history of it too much, but there's a trail, or historically was a trail that ran along the river, and it may connect to other parcels along North River Road. So there's the potential for an easement to allow public access to that trail. What's interesting is the ordinance requires that the planning board get input from the Parks and Recreation Board on what they're proposing for recreation and open space. And they're meeting tomorrow evening, so we're going to go and bring that information to them tomorrow evening and kind of get their thoughts on the boat launch and the green space and the potential trail easement to be able to bring that back to the planning board next month. The staff report also discusses some comprehensive plan considerations, and it designates this parcel as both limited business development, or LBD, and resource protection shoreland zone. The project is not proposed to impact the resource protection and doesn't exceed the recommended density for multifamily housing in the limited business development. When you look at the parcel as a whole, it's about 3.32 acres, including that area that they're proposing for the boat launch. And the comp plan language, it's intended to show a desired pattern of future land use and development, but it's not the zoning ordinance, so it's something the planning board should keep in mind as a general guide when approving projects. And lastly, the staff report also includes comments from staff. They did provide comments on this proposal, most of them anyways. Police, water and sewer, engineering. So make sure you review those comments from them. And I know this was a lot of information to take in all at once. I think the staff report does a pretty good job of bulleting out the items that I just discussed on page 10, as well as the 2 suggested waiver requests and/or plan modifications, as well as the ordinance standards for approval for subdivisions and projects in the floodplain, which are listed on pages 11 and 12. And again, to follow through with the process for a preliminary plan, we recommend that you bullet out a list of items for the applicant to address, discuss the 2 potential waiver requests, as well as the subdivision floodplain standards, and provide recommendations on how the board would like to see the proposal move forward. Sorry, that was a lot. Whew.
So, this has come up quite a bit lately, but a conflict with the comp plan. And I'm looking at the limited business development district, talking about general types of uses, multifamily not being listed, but then in development standards, there being a sentence, should include provisions to manage the amount and location of vehicular access, and provide for the buffering of adjacent residential districts. Multifamily housing and townhouse style development should be allowed at a density of up to 10 to 12 units per acre, while single and 2-family housing should be allowed at a density of up to 6 to 8 units per acre. So, as I'm reading this, am I reading that the authors of the comp plan intended to include multifamily and single? Did anyone else pick up on that? That it's not in the list of uses, but then it's discussed, but it's referenced later. And so I guess if it's referenced later, so the board will have to decide. The staff laid out the argument that it's an allowable use because it's in there. So the board's going to have to decide whether that's the case because it's described under development standards, although not listed under approved uses. My question is, how much of this is in that limited business development district and how much is in the resource protection district? And I ask for the following reason. When we look at sites that have split zoning, and I will use my own property for instance. My property has low density country residential and agricultural resource and protection. And because my house is built in the low density country residential section, there's a density of up to like 1 unit per acre or something like that. So it was no big deal to build the house there. However, if I had wanted to build my house on the ag section, I would have to have at least 10 acres in order to meet the density requirements, because we've required in the past that a structure meet the density requirements for whatever land it's actually sitting on. So my question being, okay, so here's this. Where is any of this building in the resource protection area?
So,
It's not really
without
delineated on
overlaying
the
the
site plan.
buildings
so-
on the map, I can't say for certain, but I don't believe so. But certainly something they can show in the final plan. I don't want to say yes, or I don't want to say no for sure when they're not overlaid on here. I know the resource protection does kind of jet in a little bit here, but the zoning ordinance, the map, was amended at some point to include or change this area to general development shoreland zone. So perhaps the future land use map wasn't updated concurrently with that. I'm not sure, but.
Well, if that's the case, then the board, because it's a preliminary thing, it's important for the board to sort of flesh all this stuff out, right? And so, if that's the case, then the board needs to make it a condition that needs to ask the council to amend that before this can happen. Or if it's not the case, then we need to be assured that the entirety of the buildings aren't in the any of the resource protection zone. I think, unless there's some other policy that's been used, but I bring it up because in my experience it's been that a building that's cited, it has to meet the requirements of whatever the land is that it's cited on. So that was one of my questions with regard to the comp plan, and it was like forefront of my mind because it's come up a few times. So, yeah.
If I could just add, the entire parcel is zoned general business. The future land use map, which is intended to be kind of a general guide of boundaries but not exact lines, is showing that in the future they envisioned a resource protection along the edge of the river.
Right.
I believe the entire lot is zoned general business currently.
Right. I just know that we can't. It reminds me of Woodbury Heights or similar situations where it is we are not permitted to allow a subdivision, or well, actually, this happened with the last month's meeting. We're not allowed to do a subdivision that doesn't meet the future land use policy, right? And so the map is. I understand it's a suggestion. I guess what I'm saying is I'm trying to raise the flag and say either the board has to say that's okay and we ask council to amend it, or the board is going to have to make decisions and say that's not okay and the buildings need to be cited so they're not in the resource protection zone, or that's something that's going to have to be on our radar and should really be on the radar of the applicant as well, right? So.
And I guess that's a question where can we take a step back to say, well, how is it best for us to review this? Because my understanding is that our charge as a planning board is to look at the comprehensive plan, and that is the word and upon which we build our zone. But if our zones do not match, then what's the process for updating our zoning to reflect the comprehensive plan? Historically, what has that process been, and what would the next steps be? Because we're going to continue to see this conflict, and it leaves us in a really difficult place to make a decision. So historically, how has that worked, where the comprehensive plan is updated, and then how are our zones updated to reflect the comprehensive plan?
I think the last time the board really tried to update zoning, if I remember correctly, Eric was either still city planner or had just transitioned to a different position. And the board at that time, I said, would be less than appreciative that the planning board had initiated the possibility of zoning changes to meet the comprehensive plan. It requires the council and the planning board to work together. And historically, those suggestions have not been met with positive feedback. Specifically in one area, though, it has. I can think of a handful of times in my tenure on the board where specific areas are rezoned to meet future land use proposed uses, or where the future land use map is amended, so it sort of has gone both ways. And it's been my experience, and I'm not sure if it has to happen this way, that those have happened concurrently. So the planning board sends a recommendation that a following change be made either in zoning or in the future land use maps, and that that situation being taken care of is a condition of the approval.
And I think ideally, at the conclusion of a comprehensive planning process, we do a widespread rezoning that accomplishes the vast majority of the changes that are recommended. We tried to do that for a few years after the last comp plan, and we couldn't get funding, and we didn't have staff at the time to do a widespread rezoning that covered the whole community. So we've done it sort of piecemeal over time as there's something making that particular area a priority. And often it's a project.
I also have another question for city staff. So one of the first things I do is I check out the GIS maps. And I apologize, I don't have it in front of me, and I don't want to pull my phone out. I wish we had tablets here. That would be, but it was my recollection that there is wetland and at least what looked like a small pond delineated on our current GIS maps. But I'm not seeing the pond on the site plan. I ask, was that part of the fill permit or that was issued?
I do know that they aren't proposing to impact the wetlands on the site. They've shown a wetland delineation. They've also delineated the wetlands in the submission materials, but they're not proposing to impact the wetlands. As far as the fill permit and the pond, I don't know where that 37,000 square feet of fill necessarily went. I don't know if there was a pond that was...
To be put in on the upper levels, and the site where it looks like the parking lot and the B4 test hole was dug. According to the map that I'm seeing here, that's where they were putting the 5,000 yards of wetland area was further down the peak, the piece.
Yeah, I asked because on the city map, the proposed wet pond on the plan is sort of in the general vicinity of the pond that showed up on the GIS map. I asked,
Looking at the GIS here,
Right.
yeah,
you sure it's not that inlet that showed kind of there's a
it
peninsula?
may be.
land?
This is why I'm asking for clarification. It may be. It's difficult. Oh, excellent. Rosemary's here. Rosemary, am I seeing that wrong, or?
It's this here. Could do the same thing.
It is, yeah. It's the errors in the mapping.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for being present tonight.
You can see that peninsula both on the plan and on the city's.
Okay, so what I was seeing on the, and I understand those are references, right? And it makes it very clear that those maps are for reference only, so.
If you look at the wetland or the little
Yeah.
pond, and you put the aerial photos behind it, it's clear. Can you bring that aerial photo back up?
Is that sort of that inlet?
It's that inlet.
Okay,
And on the map, it shows it as not an inlet, but as a
okay.
pond.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Other questions of staff from members of the board?
One of my first questions is on the proposal for them to donate the land as a recreational space. if they're donating that part, that spot of land at the top, does that change the overall plan, or is that removed from the plan overall? Because
Yes.
it would be a developed piece requiring impervious surface, and if you're going to do that, it changes the whole impervious surface for the entire project.
Yeah, so they removed that piece of it from the plan that you're looking at. You can see the line where they removed that piece of the property from the overall plan. Let me see if I can pull it up on here. Let me make it easy. So they've separated this portion of it out in the plan that they provided. And the lot calculations, the overall lot is 3.32 acres, and they separated out the acreage in their application materials too, to not include that portion of the lot.
So 3.32 does not include that section of the lot that they proposed to?
3.32 is the lot in its entirety, and then I think it was what, 2.51 or, let me see. It was 2.27 acres is what they're
So,
proposing.
okay, so I guess I had misunderstood that. I had understood it to be that the 3.32 was after something was taken out, which is why they met the density requirements, or the density suggestions laid out in the future land use?
For the comp plan?
Yeah.
Nope. So 3.32 is the lot in its entirety, and then 2.27 is what I think they're proposing to develop of that 3.32.
I'm sorry, Mr. Carrier, for jumping in on your
No, that's
question.
fine. No, because I just figured it's all part of the same question, so we might as well answer them all together. And you said that they did meet with the city in regards to the forestry part of this, because basically they're going to be clearing the entire majority of that site shown to this in the,
Yeah, so I think, as far as the boat launch area,
no, the other site, they're going to be clearing it, because I'm looking at the pictures that they
This-
that they submitted with the packet. So all those woods are going to be gone.
so that's already been done. They already got their fill permit and their flood hazard development permit to
Okay.
do that work, so, yeah.
I think there still is a question, though, remaining for the applicant that says, will the additional clearing be done? Is that correct?
Yep, we did lay that question out in the
Okay.
materials.
I'll look forward to hearing that. I do have a question about the boating. Is there a proposal for the type of boating that will be allowed? Will it be non-motorized or both motorized and non? And what are the impacts of both options?
I think they're still kind of figuring all of that out. I don't think we have any definitive plans at this point. So they may have some more information, but we haven't been provided with any specifics on that yet.
And just a comment there, if we're proposing, or if the applicant is proposing that having a boat launch would meet the need for recreation, I think that that only works in the case that if you have a boat. So I would really push to have a trail there. I look forward to hearing from Parks and Rec on their recommendation or thoughts on that. But unless we're talking about other forms of recreation that are not physical activity, we have to be thoughtful about who can access that form of activity.
And
I could just add, the boat launch would include both motorized and carry-in launch, but it would have to include motorized as well. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission regulates access to the impoundment there because of the hydro facility. So the applicant here is proposing to move the sort of substandard boat launch from downstream upstream and replace it with a more modern boat launch. But it would have to provide motorized access as well as carry-in access would certainly be fine too. And currently, a lot of people do like bank fishing or fishing off the dock at the site as well.
So would that be for carry-in, carry-out, or for storing boats? And it's for public use, right? So not just the residents of this?
Yes, public use.
Okay.
Yeah.
More or
You
less-
could launch a boat there. They're not proposing any storage of
Okay.
boats.
More or less the same as the launch, that's the existing launch.
Yep, but upgraded to
Right.
meet current standards.
And where did the idea for the boat launch originate?
in talking with the developer, they've acquired a few properties along the river in that stretch, and they had initially inquired about whether or not a boat launch could be upstream next to this new residential project rather than where it is.
I believe they own the property where the boat launch is now.
They own the old Higgins Sports Center
Right.
property, which is immediately to the south
To
of the public boat launch. Yep. On a smaller parcel than what's being proposed here.
So in regards to the boating, for the final application, it'd be nice to see what the impact of having motorized boats in that area would be, since we are between the floodplain and natural resource areas, what the impact is.
While we're talking about that, I'd like to see, I guess, I liked the idea of an upgraded boat access. It seemed nice that would be a reasonable, sort of in lieu of development. However, I am having a hard time marrying the idea of a boat launch with providing recreational open space. And so, if we choose to move forward with this, and I don't know how the rest of the board feels, I'm really going to have to get sold on why putting a parking lot with a concrete ramp to access water, and as Ms. Boss said, only if you happen to own a boat, how that if we've done something similar in the past, is this a completely new novel concept? So that I can really wrap my head around the implications of accepting something like that. If it's something we've never done in the past, we're sort of setting a precedent by doing so. So,
Is the proposed boat launch to replace the existing public boat launch?
Yes, it is.
Which the existing one is still in effect, correct?
Yes. Yeah, and it would have to be until a new one was approved.
And so if this doesn't go through, the existing one we still have a public boat launch there. That's been forever, correct?
The other one would go away.
Yeah, so there'd be none. No, if this development did not happen. We still have, the existing public
Yes.
boat launch is still there and will be,
Yep, it's required to be by the federal government unless it's replaced.
which allows motorboats, so they'll always, one way or the other, whether this comes or not, motorized boats are gonna be on that river.
who is proposed to build this boat launch?
The developer of the apartment complex would be funding it. We don't know if they would manage the construction or if the city would be involved and has been part of managing the construction, but the developer of this apartment project would fund the entire improvement.
So the in lieu of is not for a new recreational use, it's for an upgraded facility to replace something that we already have?
Upgraded, larger, and meeting current standards, and certainly could incorporate additional frontage for bank fishing opportunities, that kind of thing, picnic tables or other recreational amenities.
Staying in that vein, also, they talked about the trail system that had been there prior to that, and I'm looking at their map in the prospectus that they've given us, and looking at their the sketch plan that they've got. A lot of the current Woods Road that's there now would be basically taken up with either the slope to the field, the retaining wall. So are they proposing, as part of the trail, that I guess I'd want to know exactly what they're proposing for that, because they're eating up quite a bit of the trail that was there before with proposed items.
Yeah, that was something that, so they initially were proposing the green space on the site and then the boat launch, and staff knew that there was a trail in the area, so that was something that we suggested to them, that they could propose to provide a public easement to access that trail as part of their recreation and open space requirements to present to the Recreation and Open Space Board. So that's something that they're going to discuss with them, and I don't know, we haven't necessarily heard from them that they are agreeing to that. I know they mentioned that they don't want to have a trail that essentially dead ends on their lot. They want to make sure that it will continue on. So that's just something that we brought up to discuss with them.
Are there trail systems to the north or south currently?
It's private property and always has been, but a lot of people have used that for fishing access along the river. And it does extend onto the property to the south, but there's no legal standing for the existence of that trail on either property.
Just this
Okay.
one. Comes in from the road.
I'm concerned about the boat launch proposal, and I'm open to the possibility that this could be a good idea. But in actuality, if the purpose of the green space is to improve the recreation and the habitat of the residents, in actuality, I'm not sure the boat launch will serve that purpose. I mean, the residents won't have a place to store boats. I'm not sure that they'll even have a place to store canoes. And even if they had a place to store canoes and kayaks, it might be nicer to have a boat launch for people that only have canoes and kayaks. You see my point? A trail would actually enrich the lives of these future residents much more than the boat launch. So I think that the trail idea is pretty important. The boat launch could actually worsen the green space and recreation activity because all the trucks and stuff.
So I guess related to, sort of tangentially related, so in the police department review, there's this question about pedestrian access to and from, and there's a real lack of sidewalks and pedestrian access in that area. And so that worries me a little, putting so many people out there, but not allowing them any way to access the site other than in a car. Like being able to do something on a bicycle or on foot, I think is a large quality of life piece.
Different topic. Was there information in the application about the composition of units on a bedroom basis proposed and, market rate or not?
I think, and that's probably a question for the applicant, but I recall seeing in the apartment building renderings that they provided, I thought they had said 2 to 3 bedrooms and market rate. I know their market rate, but I think we should defer to them on the
Okay,
number of
then I'll
bedrooms.
follow up with a question that you guys can answer, which is the standard of 1.5 parking spaces per unit. How is that arrived at?
So it's based on the number of units that they have, so 1.5 parking spaces per unit. So if they have 36 units, then it's 36 times 1.5.
So is
It doesn't
the
account for
standard
bedrooms.
doesn't account for the number of bedrooms in the units. And I ask this question just because 1.5 could really be shy if it's 36 two-bedroom apartments. And I noticed in the photos and the street image and stuff, there's not a lot of space to park on the side of the road. So there really needs to be enough parking at this place to accommodate all the residents and their fleet of vehicles.
Are there any other questions or comments? Yes?
I do have a question. So if I'm looking at page 11 of the staff report under subdivision guidelines. Guideline number 11 says, will not adversely affect the character of the surrounding neighborhood and will not tend to depreciate the value of property adjoining the neighboring property under application. Not being entirely familiar with this street, though I've traveled it a couple of times, I know that the character is either forested or single-family home, or there's some business as well. How does staff, and maybe this is a question for the applicant as well, but how does staff see this fitting with the character, and what is the impact on adjoining neighboring properties?
I can say that the zoning ordinance that we have to go by allows for the number of units that they're proposing at the site. I would defer to the applicant for the surrounding areas and what they're proposing and how it fits in with the surrounding neighborhood.
This is a topic we've dealt with sort of recently, and this is one of those few gray areas for the board where I think it's really incumbent upon us to decide what we think the character of the neighborhood is. I think back to the Summer Street proposal, and during that process, staff was quite clear that sorry guys, we don't have an answer for you. That's your job. So I think you bring up an important point there that we'll need to address.
And a follow-up question would be, directly across the street from the proposed development, are there single-family homes, or what other buildings are across the street from the property?
I think it's the Gracelon Apartments or
It's
the,
yeah, I'm drawing a blank on the name. It's not Gracelon, but it's a substantial multifamily housing development. Kind of sets up on a hill compared to this site, though, off of Northern Avenue.
That's helpful, thank you.
We
Other
could
question?
get, units per building kind of ideas, because you can see the structures in the image, but we could find out how many units per building and how many total units.
Yeah, I'd like that. What's just south of the lot? What are those buildings that are down there?
Maybe the Web Pro images will help.
yeah. You mean like,
Get the ones to the south here.
Complex up above. Two businesses.
tomatoes? It is a general business, so, which refers to multifamily suburban for unit density. So it's a multifamily district as well as a general business district. Let's see if I can pull these up. Kind of a similar use across the street.
This is one of the apartment buildings that was sort of up on the hill.
Yes.
Utilities, including sewer, have not been available on that stretch of North River Road. This project is funding the extension of those, but it's an area that really has lacked investment for quite a while. There's some fairly rough-looking commercial uses along that stretch.
Quality of the road hasn't helped any.
Yeah, and I think the road upgrades and utilities will probably encourage some more investment down here. It's an incredible spot along the river with into the in-town flexible zoning that general development allows for.
So are there any other questions for the staff from the board? Seeing none, this is the point in our public hearing where we ask the applicant or an agent of the applicant to come forward. So, gentlemen, please state your names and your capacity with the project, and provide any information that you think might be helpful to the board in making our decisions.
Yeah, good evening. I'm Jim Corbin with Survey Works Incorporated. I'm here with Zachary Quinn of Dirico Architectural. Thank you for the opportunity to present. We're here on behalf of Tim Millett, River's Edge Apartments, LLC. Here to answer any of your questions you may have. I think Megan did an excellent job going through explaining the project, detailing the zoning concerns. And I do have some comments. First one I'd like to address is a little I'm not sure if you had a chance to see my comments to staff comments. If not, I did make a little typo. As far as the height concern, I believe that the general development district was specifically left out of DEP's Chapter 100, Section 15B2, regarding what zones need to conform to the height restriction of 35 feet. And as such, the general development, this district would have to conform to the city's zoning restriction for height, which is 45 feet, not 35 feet. Megan, could you bring up my site plan with the markings, the preliminary one?
This one?
Yes, please. So on the sketch that was submitted, we didn't delineate the 25-foot setback was delineated, but it didn't show up too well because of the toe of the slope and the siltation barrier that was all right there. But all of that's the limit of development anyway on this site. And it's well beyond the 25-foot high water mark. It's actually 25 feet from the top of the slope based on my topographic survey out there, locating the top of the slope. So any slopes greater than 3 to 1 from that top of the slope to the high water, we're offsetting 25 feet beyond that. And we'll put our siltation barrier there.
Along with what Jim just said, in the updated plan, obviously we've been working on it. We have come back, we've left at least a 3-foot gap along where the river setback buffer edge would be. So this does show it's pretty close, but we've actually...
I apologize. There are going to be members of the audience that can't hear you, but also the meetings are recorded as a matter of public record, so please do your best to speak into the mic. I apologize.
So, yeah, that's good.
Are you able to speak to one of the earlier questions regarding the type of units?
Yeah, so of course they're residential units, and they're all 1 to 2 bedroom units. There are no 3 bedrooms. And I think the total, if you're looking for total bedrooms, if you give me a moment here, I think that was part of one of my replies to initial comments. But I don't have, for example, 45.
Are they primarily 2-bedroom or 1?
They're primarily 1 bedroom.
Okay.
Yes, I think there are, I'll have to double check on this, but I think there are 3 units in each apartment building that are 2-bedroom.
Are these proposed to be market rate housing, or are you planning to use any tax incentive programs providing workforce housing, subsidized housing?
Right. I can get back to you on that one. At the moment, that's a conversation we haven't had. I believe they're just marketable apartments.
Okay. In general, the planning board really likes to hear whether or not it'll be market rate or how what the makeup of the units will be. So that's going to be important for you to bring back to the applicant.
Absolutely. Catherine, were you satisfied with what you saw for existing uses in and around the site? You had questioned if this use fits the neighborhood.
Yeah, I think it's clear that it's a pretty mixed area.
Okay.
I think I'd still like to hear from the rest of the board about their opinion on whether or not it fits current use or fits with the character, since I'm not the sole representation. But I do have a question for you. Are you able to say whether the building buildings would be within the resource protection zone or not, based on the map that you see, or that we saw previously.
Yes, this whole site is not in a resource protection zone. It is in the general development district with a shoreland zone overlay. I have not considered any proposed maps. Those are currently not in effect, in my opinion, not applicable. I'm curious as to why that's a discussion at the moment.
We're required by law to ensure that any decision we make both meets the current zoning and does not conflict with the future land use maps.
Of course.
So that's why, to answer your question, that's why it's on the table.
So on the future land use maps, it's showing a resource protection zone through the property.
Right, the property is essentially split zone, and I think I used my property as an example when I was asking that question, but part of it lies in one zone, one future proposed zone, and part of it lies in another.
And is there information on how that line is delineated? It looks like it might follow the flood zone.
Yeah, I think it does.
It does, okay.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, it is, and I will reframe that statement because I cannot remember correctly off the top of my head as I'm saying this, what the distance is. But I do know it's a function of the distance from the high water mark or the regular high water mark or something like that. There's a setback from that point, and everything in there was...
It looked pretty variable to the shoreline. I think there might be a contour that it's following. I'm sure it's published somewhere, so that's something I'll look for
That's
next
something
meeting.
that staff can provide for the applicant? Absolutely. Thank you.
And Evan, if I may, in this situation, it's unique to me for when there's a conflict between existing zoning and uses versus future zoning and uses that have, I guess, not gone into effect. What can I expect?
We may develop a solution in which the buildings are sited differently so that none of them are in resource protection. Discussions of revisiting density and the number of buildings have occurred in the past. Additional solutions include
So you're saying that,
changing-
well, we're going to look to the future zoning rather than the existing?
and additional solutions have included possibly amending future land use maps as well. Yeah, I understand that it's difficult because we are often we think about being bound to the current land use, and regular uses are bound solely to the current land use. But when the planning board does subdivision or special exception, we're required to make sure that subdivision or special exception is also consistent with the future land use maps. That's by law.
Thank you.
And I understand it's not something that anyone's really going to run into in their everyday sort of navigation of zoning. So I can respect that it was not on your radar.
Okay.
I do think it underscores that it's incumbent upon the city to prioritize rezoning or updating so that people who are interested in developing can understand what's expected of them. So it helps the city and it helps future development.
Right, this highlights a situation where we have an applicant or the agent for an applicant who is sort of stuck, I won't say blindsided, but stuck with a novel situation that could have been avoided had we amended our current land use maps to better match the future land use maps. Are there other questions from the board for the applicant?
Question, I'm not sure if you have the answer or not, but as you noticed, it's come up a handful of times here, was the boat ramp.
Yes.
What brought that to fruit, I guess?
There was a desire of our client to mill it, working with Brookfield for a better solution to the existing location of the boat launch. This one will allow for an upgrade to the facility, as well as a greater distance from the existing dam. I know that's an interest to Brookfield. As well as possibly helping to facilitate this project with open space, trying to give reason for such open space.
Is the existing, and I don't know if you were counsel, existing boat launch on public or private property?
The existing boat launch is on city property.
Okay, thank you.
Are there other questions? Thank you very much. We appreciate you coming here and being willing to answer some more questions and
Absolutely.
some of our points. Thank you.
You sure? You have any comments? Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. At this point, I'll entertain a motion to open up the public input section of this hearing.
So moved.
Motion to my left. I'll give the second to Mr. Duval. At this point, the public input section of this hearing is open, so if there are members of the public that would like to speak to this proposal, please come forward, state your name and address clearly into the mic.
My name's Sarah Raymond, and I live at 200 North River Road, so this directly affects me and my family and my road. And so I wrote a long letter, but I'm just going to, you guys brought up a lot of the concerns I already had with space, wet zone, like a lot of that area floods. So the actual buildable part of the area that does not get flooded is really kind of small. And I know they've filled it in with fill. It looks horrendous, right? They took all the nice trails that were there and they're gone. You can't use them anymore. And what's left is a very thin line on the bank, which obviously could not be used for trails. And there are no trails that go any further. There's no room, right? Because you have the businesses that run along it. And so I have lots of just concerns about, one, the amount of traffic. And I know that those apartment buildings back there, they all use Northern Ave, and they're all divided by trees up on a hill. So they're not even in your line of existence if you're looking at it. So to say they're part of the neighborhood is very different because they use Northern Ave. They do not come down our road. So recently our road has been repaved, which is lovely, but now we have 45-mile-per-hour cars. I have young children. We have no sidewalks, nothing when we asked for sidewalks when it was proposed. And so my fear is that now we're going to have all of this traffic, still no sidewalks. And so that is a concern of mine. The boat launch, I know you guys have brought it up a lot. I personally think it's a way to pacify the green space area, and that is why they want to build it. The other boat launch hardly gets used except for people to picnic and do other such things. I've lived on the river for 40 years. And honestly, there are not a lot of boats that go down it, and I don't know if moving that boat launch is going to make a huge difference. Let me see, what else did I want to mention? Destroying the wildlife there, the river, the runoff. I'm worried about the runoff. And then sewage is another thing, right? The road has been recently repaved. There's no sewage down there as far as I know. Am I correct? Yes, there's no sewage on that road. It's all private sewage. And so that's another issue. I had one more thing I wanted to mention. And I can give you the letter that I wrote before I leave. But I just have a lot of concerns about 12 or 10 unit in such a small space. Like if you go out there and look, where they're actually building is so tiny. And the river's a great place. I walk that road with my family all the time. And I am afraid that that's going to be gone. People are running down that road, bicycling down that road, and with the amount of traffic and no way to access the road safely, it's going to be an issue. Did I miss anything, dear? Yeah, it was nice down there. It's not so nice anymore. And so I worry. I guess that's it.
Thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else from the public who wishes to speak on this topic? I will assume you're familiar with the protocol, so.
Holly Lasagna, 220 West Auburn Road. I'm also the Ward 1 City Councilor. I appreciate how carefully you are all looking at this, and I think the woman who just spoke actually brought up some of the things that I've heard from other people in the neighborhood about the potential for this and also what currently is going on in that space. I know that it was approved by the DEP, but what you're looking at is potential runoff. Again, in terms of flood zone, I think we need to be much more conscientious about that. I won't go any more than that, but I do appreciate the amount of time and thought you're putting into this, particularly around the boat launch, which, is there going to be parking there? Does that take up more green space in that way? So thank you for doing all the consideration that you're doing.
Thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to speak to this topic at this time?
Hi, I'm Bob Raymond, 200 North River Road. I also have lived on this road for a while, and this project is actually making me upset because when we first moved in, it was more of we're in the middle of nowhere, but you have access to everything, and that's my neighborhood. And for me, putting this project or buildings in this area destroys that for me. I know my next door neighbor also likes that area because of how it feels we're in the middle of nature, and he has access to his work with no issues, and yeah, that's the big thing for me is the area itself. There's one point in time that the Dipsy Challenge will go down our road. Because of the condition of our road, they stopped doing it. I'm hoping that they will come and do that again. Just to tell everybody, since they put the new road in, people are going faster. They were going fast before in a really not very good road. In fact, the last time they touched the road I heard was in 1961, so it's been a really long time. And just to have, again, I feel that this will destroy it. I think the buildings will be too close to the road, or the parking lots could be too close to the road, because if you visibly look at it, there's not a lot of room. It's just a small strip. And I feel that the map is not accurate, because I feel that the area of where they can build is smaller than what's being shown. So that's what I want to say.
Thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to speak on this topic? Seeing none, I'd look for a motion to close the public input section of the hearing.
So moved.
There's a motion to my left. Is there a second?
Second.
Second to my far left. All those in favor? So that members of the public know at this point is when the board has its deliberations. I say that only because the last public hearing had incredibly short deliberations and it may not have been even recognized as such. So as the chair, I'm going to try to give the board some direction. This is a proposed plan. We have essentially three options. After we finish our deliberations, we can choose to accept it, providing specific feedback to the applicant as to what we would be looking for in a final plan. It is possible to deny the proposal, but only if we provide reasons for doing so. And the final option is that it is possible for us, because this is not a site plan review and does not time out in 30 days, it is possible for us to table this, provide clear feedback to the applicant's agent as to the concerns the planning board has, so that they can possibly address those, provide additional information at the next meeting. So those are our three options. Having said that, I will allow member of the board to begin discussion on this topic, and I'm going to step back for a minute.
I guess I'll start off. I have several questions in regards to this. Things that I think that the city really needs to look at before a final approval can be given. I have concerns with the floodplain overlay. I have a couple of issues with the parking and addressing the green space. So I've got probably not quite as many as the city had as far as the recommendations, but I have several questions that I'd like to see further work on.
I agree. And we also had some questions for the applicant regarding market rate, what type of units, what type of clientele. And also, I think there is a big, the elephant in the room is the boat launch, and whether that's actually just pacifying everybody, or is it actually the best use of the green space for not only the occupants of the proposed apartments, but also the rest of the neighborhood. So I think we definitely need more answers from the applicant.
I would agree. I think it would be really difficult, if not impossible, to approve the proposal as it stands without having any information on the stormwater, particularly given the location and flooding, et cetera. And I share the same concerns that have already been brought up.
I do want to mention, I know one person from the public mentioned of the lack of sewer service out there, but I believe staff mentioned part of this project does pay to extend sewer to that distance, correct?
Yep, they already stubbed it in before the road was paved.
Okay.
So they won't have to cut into the road and deal with the moratorium and that piece of it.
They already paid to have it stubbed out? Okay.
I do think that is a question that we should cover. It kind of puts us between a rock and a hard place when this project is already under active construction. It says somewhere in the documentation, and I don't have it in front of me because it's probably 100 pages here, but it says that it was the application for filling the space was approved administratively by staff. Can you explain more about that process, and should that have come in front of the planning board, or is that standard, or just a little bit more context for how that decision was made?
You can fill in the floodplain with a permit, and it is administratively approved by staff. We didn't know what type of project we would end up with on this site. When the city contracted with a contractor to rebuild North River Road, we were approached by Mr. Millett. He had an opportunity to accept the roadway materials as fill for a greatly reduced cost over what it would normally cost to go out and buy fill material to level the site. So they wanted to obtain the fill permit so that during the construction of the roadway, they could accept the materials that were being removed from the roadway and replaced with actual crushed gravel. They did, on the site plan, you can see just at the end of Northern Avenue, there's a line that crosses the road, as Megan mentioned, that says FM. That's a short section of fairly inexpensive forced main that'll allow them to tie into the sewer system that exists on Northern Avenue without impacting the road. But it is common for people to apply for filling permits in the floodplain. It's more difficult in the floodway, where you actually, FEMA anticipates currents in the flood zone, in the floodway, whereas just the 1% floodplain is just inundation of water in the 1% flood zone. And
So a follow-up question is, the River's Edge Apartments LLC, are there other apartment buildings that are currently under that LLC title? That might be, so
I
no.
don't know
So
the
all of the
answer.
permits have been applied for with that River's Edge Apartments LLC name. So the assumption would be that it would be for apartment buildings. Am I?
River's Edge LLC.
Yeah, it's on the,
Permits.
it's on all of the documentation, all of the permits, that name, and there's also reference to future development throughout all of these documents as well. So I think the assumption would have to be that the plan was not to end with just filling.
Yep, yeah, I see it on the floodplain application as well. No, we anticipated there being development on the site. We just didn't know at the time what it would be.
So, to reiterate then, earlier I thought somebody had spoke that this project would extend sewer out River Road. That's not the case. They're not even tying into River Road or bringing sewer out River. They're tying into Northern Ave, correct?
With a forced main that could accommodate additional flows. So anybody from there uphill as you pass by this site could potentially tie into that.
North of the site. Heading
North
out.
or south, potentially.
Okay.
If they can gravity feed back to the pump station that would be installed as part of this project.
So the pump station would be installed at the northern avenue.
On this, along that end of the site somewhere, I don't know the exact location, but the pump station would be at the low point along North River Road, and it would pump up to Northern Avenue.
Okay, thank you for clarification.
There was also reference in one of the documents to the North River Road Reclamation Project. I've not heard of that, so is there any additional information that you can share about what that project is?
That was the street reconstruction of North River Road, I think.
So
is
the
what they
repaving of the road itself?
They removed the gravel roadbed, removed the asphalt,
Okay.
replaced the roadbed with new gravel, and all of that old gravel ended up on this site.
Gotcha, thank you.
Are there other members that have discussion? I hazard speaking for the board, but I think the tone is one of caution that I'm hearing. And so I wouldn't anticipate, although it is possible, I probably wouldn't anticipate a approval tonight. So the question will be, does the board want to table this for additional information? Or which has generally been in the past what the board does in a situation like this where we see a project and have several questions. However, it's also certainly the purview of the board to deny the preliminary proposal with feedback so that the applicant can develop a new one as well. So it sounds like if we continue to have discussion about the project itself, we will continue to discuss the same items. So I would like to shift the discussion to how the board would like to move forward with a motion on this topic. And we'll start. We started over here. We'll start over here.
Go ahead.
I'll go. So, if you look at that area, there really is a mixed, perhaps even eccentric mix of different types of buildings and stuff. Personally, I think it would be absolutely appropriate to put multifamily housing there. I think that the boat launch proposal is not an adequate proposal to address recreational needs of future residents that might dwell at this property. And so it's just sort of an idea that's come in, I think. So I think that we need an alternative proposal on recreation. I have a question for other board members, which is, I think we all have concerns that if this project were developed, it would be flooded. And so I guess I'm not sure how those concerns can be assuaged, but I'll put those out there as well.
Perhaps we could ask staff for the FEMA high water marks for the 5, 10, 100-year.
Excellent suggestion, yes.
While you're at the, would you favor tabling this until next month for further discussion so that we can receive more information from staff and the applicant?
Well, if we decide to table, we should come up with a specific list of concerns and questions that we want to answer. So I'm trying to put out my specific concerns so that we can develop that list.
we'll need to develop that list regardless of whether we table or choose to do something else. So I guess,
Well, I'm not inclined to reject the proposal at this point in
Okay.
time.
okay. Are there members that are inclined to outright reject the proposal at this time? No. I guess Mr. Engler's correct then. We need to make a list of things that should be addressed. So I know that Megan and Eric have been taking notes. Would you mind, Megan, do you feel like you've been taking a list of notes that you could give back and the board could let you know if there's anything missing?
Yeah, I know there's Microsoft Word on here. I was thinking I'll just type them on here and it'd make it a lot easier, but
Would, highlighting, obviously, floodplain,
Yep.
a different type of recreational use besides a boat launch,
Yep.
possible sidewalk.
Safe Streets is the one that, is it Safe Streets that deals with that?
Yeah, I think so. Complete
And
streets,
they
complete
should have
streets.
they should have done something. Eric, is that correct? That when they talk about redoing a road, isn't Safe Streets supposed to be involved in?
Complete Streets Committee, yeah.
Okay.
And they should have reviewed the North River Road proposal, but we can check with engineering to see if they did that.
It seems odd, because I know that even in our section of the road out on Hotel Road, that they've brought up the fact that there's no sidewalks and there's no bicycle roadways and stuff, so.
I'm guessing that they reviewed it and there was some type, either a space constraint or financial constraints that prevented the installation of the sidewalk.
We need to see a stormwater plan.
as far as the flooding concerns, I want to make sure I document that correctly. They have shown on the plan the base flood elevation, which is the elevation that the site is at, I believe. And FEMA requires that the site be elevated 1 foot above the base flood elevation, and I think they're proposing to elevate the buildings like 5 feet above the base flood elevation. So they are out of the floodplain according to FEMA's standards and flood insurance purposes and all of that. But if there's more information that you would like on that, I mean, I can.
Well, I think there were concerns, so it would be reasonable to ask staff to just present where those additional FEMA levels are, like.
Like the 5-year, 100-year.
Yeah, 5-year, you know.
And also, I don't want to step on anybody's toes.
Go for it.
And also, I had questions about the fill. I know that they've currently used 5,000 yards plus or minus. I need to know if they're going to use any more. And do they address in the permit request is the type of fill they're using?
I believe that was in the fill application, but I will confirm.
And is there any additional planned clearing for the project? We didn't ask that question of the applicant tonight, but I do want to see that.
On that, I'd like to see a couple of current pictures of what we're dealing with, because I look at what we've got here, the pictures that were provided us in there, and honestly, having not been out there and beyond the bakery in the last 6 months, I'd like to know what it looks like out there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And could we also get a photo of across the street? Because I'd like to hear more or be able to visualize what was brought up by one of our residents, saying that you can't see the multifamily buildings that are up on the hill behind there. And so does that meet the character, or is that part of our character discussion? I mean, if you can't see it, does it count? I'd like, we should have a further discussion about that, but I'd like to see what that looks like.
And I guess for the current photos, the photos of the boat launch area would be good as well. Yeah, for current photos, I'd like not only the build site, but the.
We talked additionally about siting of the buildings in different designated future land use zones. As well as wanting to know if the proposed apartments are planned to be market rate or if they will be paid for through a tax subsidy.
I think there was a question regarding actual bedroom count versus parking, parking spaces.
Can we see the complete streets report on North River Road? And I assume Complete Streets would have done that work while not thinking about this development. Would that be correct?
We can look at the timing. They probably were unaware of this potential development.
Right.
I know that the applicant is under no obligation to tell us what their plans are for other properties, but I understand that they own adjoining properties. And it would be nice if they'd be willing to share of any proposed major changes in the uses around there as well. Again, I say that knowing that they're not required to, and I'm not trying to compel them to discuss something that would not be in their best interest. I understand sometimes when you're doing development, it's not in your best interest to discuss those ahead of time, but if there's some things that they know of that might be helpful as well.
I think their nearest property is 2,000 or 3,000 feet to the south, but
Okay.
I don't think they'd be opposed to explaining what their plans are.
Is there anything else that a member of the board feels should be included with feedback for staff and the applicant? Information that we'd be looking for? If there's none at this point, I'd be seeking a motion to table the public hearing until next month, at which time we will expect to hear back with feedback from staff and the applicant regarding the specific topics we discussed.
Make a motion that we table this project for the time being until the next monthly meeting of the planning board, with the stipulation that the staff and applicant can provide further information in regards to the overall plan.
The motion has been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Am I right? Discussion? No discussion. All those in favor? This topic has been tabled until the next meeting. Thank you all for coming and speaking. Our next item is a public hearing and discussion to review and discussion of recommendations to City Council regarding the adoption of an ordinance regarding commercial solar installations. We're going to run this public hearing the same way we ran the last public hearing, following the same order. Having met with city staff previously, we discussed the idea that while this is a public hearing, we are unlikely to have enough information to make a comprehensive decision tonight, and that if it is okay with the board, that we use this time to hear from staff regarding what has been done, where they are in the process, with the understanding that we will most likely table this item for future discussion. Is that amenable to the board, or is there anyone that objects? All right. At this point, we'll hear the staff report, please.
So for this meeting, we prepared a draft ordinance on solar energy generating systems for the planning board to review. At this point, like Chairman Sear mentioned, there's still a few outstanding questions and items that staff needs feedback on from the planning board. So our thoughts are that the planning board can review the ordinance and questions that are listed in the staff report and bring back some thoughts for discussion at the December planning board meeting. Then we can have a complete draft to circulate in January. So as of right now, as you know, solar installations are permissible in the industrial district. So this process is really to establish performance standards and a review process for them. And as you'll see in the draft ordinances, right now, we're proposing to allow ground-mounted, which are your typical solar panels that are mounted on the ground, and dual-use solar energy systems less than 1 acre in total land area as a permitted use in the industrial district. So this is just a starting point. The planning board can certainly modify, adjust the acreage requirements, but as a start, we're thinking if they're 1 acre or less, they would be allowed by right without requiring planning board review. Any installations that would be proposed to be over 1 acre would require review by the planning board as a special exception. And it was a bit of a lengthy process internally coming up with that 1 acre threshold, because at first we had started by including both the lot area and the electricity generation of the overall system. We got into how many solar panels would it take to supply one house or multiple houses, how much area does each solar panel need, what's the amount, what does this all amount to, et cetera, et cetera. And we ultimately agreed that electricity generation is really not a land use matter, and it would really just be the acreage that they would be proposing to occupy by the solar installation that the planning board would be most concerned with, and how that should be buffered and those sorts of things. So we kind of backed off a little bit and went back to the 1 acre threshold to start with. So the first question that really comes up is that 1 acre threshold enough? Should it be more like 5 or 10 acres? Should it be less, like 10,000 square feet, like the building requirements for the industrial district? And another thought that we had was that any building integrated or roof mounted solar installations, which building integrated are just basically solar panels that are integrated into a building or shingles, and then your typical roof mounted, those would be allowed by right in any zoning district as they are right now. And we also assumed, which is something the planning board will have to discuss, that ground mounted installations, for example, this one that would be adjacent to a home, would be permitted by right so long as the power that's generated is intended to be consumed on site by the homeowner or business. And with this thought process, we've essentially exempted them from the ordinance so that they won't get pulled in if they're occupying more than an acre, which I doubt would happen with one that's accessory to a house, but maybe a commercial building would require that much space. So does the planning board agree with this approach? Should there be other types of installations that would be subject to planning board review if they're over a certain size? One thing that was interesting in our research is we learned that with net metering, technically all solar power that's generated on a lot, no matter how it's generated, roof mounted, dual use, could be considered commercial because the power is essentially generated, sold back to the grid, and then the homeowner or business is given a credit on their electricity bill. So there was actually a court case where a community in Pennsylvania essentially prohibited net metering by referring to their solar installations as commercial solar installations. So that's why we're trying to be a little careful with our language to make sure that we don't get ourselves into a situation where we're preventing net metering from happening. So as discussed in the staff report, we used the wireless telecommunications ordinance as our template for this ordinance, and we pulled examples from Portland, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, some communities out west. And the bulk of the ordinance is really the performance standards section. And for example, what should the buffering requirements be for solar installations? Should they be less than a building in the industrial district? Should they be more? What would a reasonable threshold be? Should they be exempt from lot coverage restrictions? For example, solar panels, as you can see here, there's a tiny portion of them that would actually cover the lot as opposed to the solar panels themselves, which are essentially impervious surface that water could essentially just run off them and into the ground like it would anyways. So should they be exempt from lot coverage restrictions? Would the planning board like to see specific standards developed for glare? How would this be measured and enforced? I know other communities have developed standards for glare, but in terms of enforcing, like your solar panels are too shiny on this person's house, how would we go about doing that? What about visual impacts or a separate standard for lighting? So for example, the ordinance has standards for lighting, like parking lot lighting, building lighting, but it may not necessarily address lighting that would be associated with solar panels. Maybe the back of the panels have lights on them that would be offensive to neighboring properties. So that's just something the planning board may want to consider, that items that are otherwise not covered by our ordinance. So really, these are the items that we would like to get some feedback from on the planning board. And our thought was that instead of having the planning board kind of rattle off some thoughts at this meeting, it might be better to kind of take it home and review it and think a little bit more about it and come back in December with your thoughts. And then at that time, we'll take all those thoughts and compile them into a ordinance to bring back in January that will hopefully address what the planning board would like to see in this ordinance. So.
Is that okay with the planning board? So the questions are all under the staff recommendations. So these are the questions that staff is asking us to think about and be prepared to discuss next meeting.
And you may have way more questions than that. Those are just the ones that kind of popped up. But if you have experience or, things you run into, it would be great to hear that information too.
And to be clear, this is for the industrial zone.
Correct.
This is setting up standards for where they're already allowed. This is not allowing them someplace new or.
Aside from the fact that the roof-mounted and building integrated and ones that are accessory to a residential commercial use would be exempt from this ordinance, so they could do them in any zoning district.
Okay. But they can already do that now.
They can,
right?
yep.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, there's nothing that prohibits them now.
Yeah.
And there's nothing that prohibits them in the industrial district. If someone proposed a 50-acre solar project right now, you'd review it as a special exception.
Right, we just have no standards.
But there's no standards for
Right.
you to review it against.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. I think this is a good starting point. I think it really would be a good idea to bring these questions home individually and think about these things before we start a real in-depth discussion. Would the board be willing to table this until next meeting? And if so, is someone willing to make a motion?
I make a motion that we table the solar discussion until the December meeting.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there discussion? Assuming none. All those in favor? All right. So yeah, don't lose. I know we put our things up here. Don't put this one away. The next item on our agenda is a new business ruling changing a street name per section 46-1826C1I from Balsam Drive to Casabora Way. And we will proceed with this public hearing the same way that we proceeded with the previous hearings. Is staff ready to present?
Yep. So this is a really simple proposal to change a street name from Balsam to Casabora. Normally, something like this would just go through the city's addressing officer, but interestingly, we found a standard in the ordinance under Chapter 46 that requires names of new streets that are not going to be accepted by the city to be subject to approval by the 911 addressing officer and the planning board. So the only issue that's really come up with this is that our internal procedures recommend that the city not assign proper names to streets, but a precedent has really already been set by allowing John Deere Road and Subaru Drive. So we as staff and the 911 addressing officer would recommend the planning board vote in favor of renaming this street. But where this is the first time the planning board has seen a proposal like this, I know the addressing officer has been here at the meeting to answer any questions you may have on the process.
My hope is that this will be the last time that planning board has to look at something like this. I don't know why that was ever written. Are there questions for the staff from the board?
Are there other property owners who use that address that it would change for them from Balsam to the new name? And have they been part of the conversation, if so?
Rosemary Moses, GIS manager and addressing officer. The only other property that uses it's rather complicated. The little offshoot that goes, once it goes past the building, is currently Caspora, and that is a small offshoot with a name, and there's a cell tower down there. And so that would have to be readdressed. But it's not a residence, it's just a cell tower for the 911 purposes. That would be the only addressing. All of the other properties that are affected are actually owned by the same owner. They've just purchased.
And what's the reason for not allowing proper names?
Generally, we have looked at it, and most cities look at it, that if you allow a proper name and then there's another business that comes in, if it's in John Deere Drive or something, if they move out and somebody else wants to move in, there could be another request for another readdressing, and so we've tended to avoid that for that reason. We do have the small offshoot that's already named Caspora Way, so we've already actually used that name. Quite honestly, I didn't realize it was a proper name when I assigned it, but we have done it to a number of streets in the city.
I mean, I guess the question is, if we're not following the policy, should we change the policy, or do we hold the policy? It's just a general, question.
That's a good question. I think, ironically, it's the sort of thing we wouldn't be thinking about if there wasn't that sort of odd rule that had come before us. I guess I would say my personal preference would be that this ends with us recommending to the city council that they amend the ordinances to remove us from that, as well as ask the naming officer to review the policy and either justify changing the policy or continued use. I guess, I don't know. I'm not sure we have, since this is an internal policy, I'm not sure we have much, yeah.
It is currently set up as sort of what in your language would be a special exception. That is the way it's currently sort of worded, and that we have, it doesn't happen automatically. It has to go through a process within the city to be elevated.
So there is already a process for it. It's just in general you try to avoid it.
Correct.
Okay. All right, well, seeing no further discussion, I'm going to seek a motion on the topic. And so this is to either accept or reject a change in street name.
I make a motion to accept the change in street name.
From Balsam
From
Drive
Balsam Drive to Caspora Way.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded. Discussion? None being. All those in favor? Motion passes unanimously. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think at a later date, we should take up the idea of whether or not we want to, say, let's not make it our show, yeah. All right, the next item on our agenda is a public hearing to review discussion and recommendations to the City Council regarding the creation, composition, of roles and responsibilities outlined in the draft Division 8 Agriculture Committee. We did have a special meeting, a special workshop last month, and I know not everyone from the board was able to make it, but it was a good discussion, And if I remember correctly, the idea is that staff is going to sort of recap, yes? Recap the takeaway from that meeting, and that's going to be our jumping off point for this discussion? Yes, or I can recap, yeah.
I was going to potentially recap the ordinance. I wasn't at the meeting, so maybe members of the board could do a better recap than I could of the previous meeting.
Okay, excellent. And I brainstormed with staff some possible ways to move forward with this at our monthly meeting, so I'll share those after Mr. Cousins is done reading the draft.
And actually, I'm looking at the staff report now. The staff report provides a pretty good recap of everything that I understand happened at the last meeting. I think there were a couple of members absent. One was John Engler, I think, and Kyle Pepin was also absent. So John's the only member that was absent last time, I think, that is now here tonight.
From the workshop? I was
From
present.
Oh, yeah, I think,
Okay.
Yeah, he was there.
I was looking at the minutes, so it looked like you were absent from the minutes that were approved tonight, but the workshop.
No,
was-
I did enter the room a few minutes late, as I recall. This roll call.
So as far as going over the proposed ordinance, the city manager's office, along with a couple of city councilors, had arranged for a group of residents to get together and come up with a draft that could then be put forward to the planning board and council that would establish an agricultural committee. You, as a board, reviewed that draft last month. The committee would serve multiple purposes, but the purpose statement in the ordinance that I think sums it up pretty well would be to proactively review city policies, practices, and ordinances to build a stronger food, agricultural, and resource economy in Auburn, and to address the ongoing needs of protecting farms, farmland, natural resources, forestry, businesses, and woodlots. I think that group talked a bit about their purpose, and it sounds like the board had similar ideas, that this would not be just a group that gets together and talks about our agriculture and resource protection zoning district. This would be a group with a broader scope to actually promote agricultural businesses and farms and address the needs of that sector of our economy, including forestry and woodlots throughout the city. So it could be in the agriculture resource protection district, but it could also be in any district within the city. It could be infrastructure needs that would support processing or freezing or cleaning of products, storage or distribution. It could attempt to address any aspect of the agricultural industry that needed public support from this committee, from the city council, or from the planning board. It could also engage other organizations with similar purposes. They could bring in outside resources like the Maine Farmland Trust, Maine Department of Agriculture, if that helped to meet the needs of agricultural businesses or farms within the city. As written, they would serve in an advisory role, really providing advice on ag-specific questions to the planning board, to the conservation commission potentially, and also to the city council. The way that the current draft is written, they wouldn't have a lot of actual decision-making authority. It would be more an advisory role to help guide the council and planning board in making decisions that affect agriculture. We did talk about the membership. There was some value seen in being able to pull in membership of this group that isn't necessarily residents. One example of that would be, let's say Harry Ricker was willing to serve on this agricultural committee. They operate Wallingford's Orchard. They're not Auburn residents. but they do have a stake in what happens to agriculture within the city. Certainly one of the larger business owners, it might be valuable to have their perspective on a board like that. Could be somebody that works for an agricultural group, Maine Farmland Trust that lives across the river, or the Good Food Council, a group that certainly has an interest in locally produced foods and how those are distributed locally. There were certain organizations or people like that that do have a stake and a connection to agriculture within the community, that there seemed to be some value in having access to them as board members, potentially. But I certainly understand concerns with having non-residents advising the city on decisions too, if the board was ever stacked in a way that it didn't favor the residents of the city. But something for the board certainly to think about as you form a recommendation. I think that essentially covers the highlights. Be happy to answer any questions.
One of my initial concerns earlier, and then reading this until I heard you speak, was the non-residents. And some of us had brought that up previously, but I think you brought up a good point. If it is a non-resident, I feel they should be a landowner and taxpayer in Auburn, maybe. And perfect example was with the Rickers. They'd have a lot of positive input. A lot of it's going to affect them, and a ton of knowledge. And again, not a resident, but they are landowners and taxpayers in Auburn. So to me, that would work as a non-resident rather than just somebody who doesn't actually have a vested interest in our city.
I agree. I think what's going to help is just to remind us all of the process we went through at the workshop. We were all there. We came to a consensus that we felt the purpose at the time should be a little more defined and be more synergistic between the Planning Board, Conservation, and Ag Commission. And at the time, at the workshop, people seemed amenable to recommending that the purpose, the description of the purpose be amended, not to focus on forestry, natural resources, but to really highlight that as work done by the Conservation Commission, promoting agriculture, and a local food economy being part of the Ag Commission's task, and the land use and zoning being taken by the Planning Board, so that we were avoiding sort of conflict and overlaps, but that we were still doing important work that could inform each other. Is that something that we still are all on board with? Okay, so I think we can start there with when we make a recommendation, thinking about how we want to express that to the council, how we want to express that purpose. Which brings us to the next piece, being and actually, you know what? While I have this in front of me, I'm have a copy for staff. This is, so I'll make copies. Well, staff should have a copy. That way it can go in the public record. This is actually from the Maine Farmland Trust, and it's an example of a charter. So we wouldn't use a charter. We'd use a oh, yeah.
You have one?
You do have, sorry.
An example, and it actually sort of really fit well, I thought, with some of what we were discussing. Obviously, this is not exactly what we would adopt, but I thought this was a good sort of matrix for some of what we had discussed, not specifically in the roles and responsibilities, but in the way the purpose was outlined. So that brings us to the next piece. So let's create the language on that piece. What is our feedback with regard to the purpose? So we're going to provide feedback to council. how do we want that worded? What do we want to say? Oh, and I apologize. I should back up. Staff, I spoke with staff. We talked about possibly going through this the same way we went through the proposal for the language for the ag zone, in that, you know, purpose seemed to be one thing we talked about at the workshop. The establishment and qualifications were another piece, and then the powers and duties, so that we could give feedback on those 3 sections. And that our feedback, the last time we had this in front of us, we sort of got quagmired with wordsmithing, but that it might be more powerful for us to provide feedback on what we want to be represented in a final draft, rather than trying to dictate how the final draft would be written. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so.
Yes and no. As I've read through this, because not having a copy of it beforehand, both in the purpose and in the powers and duties, I would like to add one word that we seem to be overlooking in that, and in both locations, it keeps saying, and to protect farms, farmland, national resources, forestry, business, and woodlots, and down under the powers and duties, again, it says protect farms, forestry, business. Well, part of this is also going to have to be to promote the farm. That's the purpose of the agricultural zone, is to promote farming. So that needs to be a part of this. And that was actually part of our discussion, is them being able to be a sort of a center point for people to be able to go to get information, sort of having it all available right there. So I would want that to be added to it. I know we don't like to get into the wordsmithing quite a bit, but I would like that added, because, you know, as part of the agricultural zone, the idea behind this is to make sure that the farmland is used for farming.
So under the purpose, recommendation number 1 being, Mr. Carey is proposing that,
Just adding one word.
that it be amended to also include promoting. Farms,
Needs of, right there behind of, needs of, promoting, comma, protecting farms.
Okay.
I'd like it to be mentioned that that's there, because you're going to promote farms, but you also want to protect them from the land uses. Yeah, and the same with down in powers and duties. Ongoing needs of, and just
So I would,
promoting. Yeah, that's all.
remember that, because when we get to powers and duties, I want to bring that up. I worry if we go back and forth that things
Oh, no,
will get.
okay, that's fine.
So, my recollection of the workshop conversation is that forestry was going, and natural resources were thought to be better handled by the Conservation Commission.
Yes.
So in the purpose, I wouldn't want the purpose to reflect, I would want the purpose to reflect that.
So the purpose,
So as written, if we're not going to wordsmith, I would remove references to.
yeah, I apologize, I said wordsmith. I don't mean like.
Yeah.
Like, you could be specific, I think. I would hate for us to, I guess what I'm saying is I would hate for us to write a new
I think that was a
paragraph.
good word. I'm really.
So I would, if we all accept that, then I would question including natural resources, forestry businesses, and woodlots in the purpose for the agricultural committee.
So ongoing needs of protecting and promoting
Farms and
farmland.
farmland,
period, but not to include natural resources, forestry, businesses, and woodlots, because natural resources, forestry, and woodlots.
Would be
Technically different things.
handled by the Conservation Commission and not by an agricultural.
I'm just trying to get us to say it out loud, because
Yep.
poor Megan's trying to like write as we're.
Yeah, I don't think it's gonna work like, I think I'm just gonna bullet them out, because I don't
Yeah,
have the
I
ordinance.
think bulleting them out and then.
You don't know
yeah.
what we're thinking?
Would forestry businesses count as an agricultural pursuit? I understand removing natural resources and woodlots, but is a forestry business considered an agricultural?
It's not considered farming under our ordinances, and the state has a forestry and agriculture, but they're separated, so
Okay,
I think it
thank
makes
you.
sense to separate them.
There has been some desire in the multiple committees that have worked on these related issues to sort of elevate forestry. It's 75% of the ag zone is forested. Elevated to at least kind of a level playing field with agriculture, but they are different.
Did Bill Sylvester tell you what to say before you got here? Is that-
Yes. At least 25 times over the last 4 years.
Well, and to follow that, is forestry and woodlots included in the purview of the Conservation Commission? Like, is that already embedded in their bylaws or their charter, or do we need to then ensure that it's added to their?
They do have some duties related to that. I don't think that they're as broad or kind of extensive as
My
what I thought they
recollection,
should be.
when we read it at the workshop, my recollection was that it's actually in their charge that they have some mandate over the community forest
And natural resources.
and natural resources.
I think we had a
So-
question what the community forest was, if that's a very specific geographic space, or if it's all forest within the community. So I think clarifying, I just would hate to remove it from this language and then have it get lost.
I know it includes all city-owned forests, but I'm not sure that it has as much reach beyond that as people would like it to.
Yeah, so some clarification of that would be, because the rest of our thinking at that workshop falls apart unless we then end up amending, right? So it all hinged on that. That's a critical piece that I don't see how we can move forward if we actually don't have that information
Right now?
right now.
So, community forests. Are you able to pull up? Do you have the muni ordinance available to you right there?
We can try while you continue your discussion.
Okay, all right. Also, one of the things we talked about in the purpose, so we're talking about protecting, promoting farms and farmland, but we had mentioned in the workshop that it also include the local agricultural community or economy, the local agricultural economy throughout the city. So I think it's important that we include that it's not just farms and farmland, but that we include agricultural economy throughout the city, because that includes everything from production, washing, storage. I mean, we're even talking about, at that point, distribution. We're talking about, including working with local restaurants to make sure that local produce is making it into their kitchens. So I think,
It's a huge issue.
I would like to restructure the purpose statement a little bit, because in the first line, it says, Ag Committee shall be proactively reviewing the city policies and such, but this is just really a means of ensuring that Auburn is a hospitable city to support farming. So it's not like the first part of the purpose. The purpose is to promote farms, safeguard the farmland, promote the farm economy, also ensure that the city of Auburn is hospitable to farming. The proactive review is a means towards the overarching purpose.
yeah, I agree. So the purpose of the Agricultural Committee is really to build a stronger food, agriculture, and resource economy in Auburn, and to address ongoing needs of protecting and promoting farms, farmland, and the local agricultural economy, something like that.
Yes.
Okay. Does anyone have a issue with sending that recommendation as the recommendation for the? So I'm going to ask if anyone has feedback on that, additional feedback.
Did I butcher this? Or?
Right, well, I guess we're also waiting.
Okay.
On the,
I will say it again, but I think we need to address Matt's concern because it seems to be a sticking point, so. I promise I will remember what I said. I'll give you time to look up the Municode.
Yesterday.
Not going to remember that.
Yesterday, I had pulled barbecue chicken.
Oh, okay, I just wanted to make sure that.
Yep.
Are they in our ordinance?
Maybe we can quickly touch on another topic, which is this notion of whether non-residents should be voting members of this committee. I still don't think that they should. and I'm wondering if there couldn't be an associate role on this committee for the expert class, right? So we want these non-residents on the committee in theory to access their expertise and perspective. Could they, the reason I've been concerned about putting these people on the committee is because I don't think there's any other non-resident that serves on a committee that makes decisions about what happens in Auburn. Is there?
But, so you still have a problem as far as using Ricker for an example, if they're a landowner and taxpayer?
I would want, I think that farmer could participate maybe as a non-voting member. But, I mean, I didn't have the right to sit on the planning board when I was just a tax-paying business owner in Auburn. I had to move here and be a resident, right? And I still think that there's something about that logic. I mean, I'm still confused about why we would allow non-residents on this committee. We don't allow non-residents on any other committee. Non-residents might have expertise that could benefit those committees' purposes.
It'd be like having somebody on the committee was a farmer from Oklahoma.
No, yeah, well, I agree. This is the discussion we had last time, was that, like, we were all residents of the city, but we call in expertise when we need it. And we didn't need Stephanie from the state to be a board member to come down and talk to us about.
As an advisory person or something is what you're talking.
Yeah, if we think it's that important to involve on an ongoing member basis farmers or other experts, I would say perhaps as a non-voting associate member.
Do we want to finish this conversation about voting, or do we want to go back to the forest question?
I think we should go back to forest probably.
So it looks like their role is more or less limited to community forests, which are public street trees, school properties, city-owned parks. They really don't have much authority to work on private lands or to address standards on private lands, from what I can see.
This is the Forestry Board or the Conservation Commission?
This is the Forestry Board.
How about the Conservation Commission?
So I think the Forestry Board is a subset of the Conservation
yeah.
Commission.
I just want to leave this up in case we want to go back to it.
That certainly wasn't what we were looking for there.
That wasn't.
While they're looking, I think in our last meeting we did talk about, I thought we came to consensus that we all agreed that we would want to have fully resident members of the Agricultural Committee, although I do like Dan's idea, if you are a taxpayer and you own property, then you still have a vested interest, particularly if you are currently farming that land.
And
So
I
I'd-
was 100%
Yeah.
landowner until Pete brought up, what made me perk was when he brought up Ricker. Because I just looking
Right.
at something like that could help. But up until that point, I was 100% also saying I wanted them to be landowners. I mean, residents. Until he mentioned that, and maybe there was a way to put them on as a non-voting or something.
Yeah, is it
Be
possible to
able to
make
take
them?
advantage of their knowledge, and they do have a vested interest. They might not be residents, so maybe they don't have a vote, but they could be a non-voting member, 'cause
Yeah, I guess as I'm processing, I'm thinking it certainly makes sense to say landowners because they have a vested interest. I think Mr. Engler brings up an important point. They don't have quite the same vested interest as a resident. We're talking about what we would perceive as a positive example of a landowning non-resident on the board, but it's also possible to have
Open the door.
a large landowning non-resident on the board who has an eye towards developing traditionally agricultural lands. And so we would want to avoid that person having a vote. And I think, unfortunately, the only way to prevent that person from having a vote is to prevent all people in that position from having a vote. But certainly I think that's a good idea, the idea of the non-voting members. Yeah. So is this are these the duties?
Yeah,
the powers and duties?
Conservation Commission in general.
It seems that you'd probably want to recommend some additional clarity to this ordinance if you wanted them to be responsible for specific forestry areas.
Do they have a purpose statement above?
Environmental and conservation.
Paragraph above that, Meg.
Um,
Ready, I just might help move your thinking forward.
Yes, so we have not opened the public input section of the hearing because we've only talked to staff. However, you're sort of in a unique position. I will call for a vote. All those in favor of asking Ms. Lasagna to be included in this discussion, considering her role as a city councilor. All those in favor of doing that? Okay, yeah.
Hello, Lasagna, 220 West Auburn.
Oh, you're
Road.
part of the discussion now. You're
Okay.
not.
The reason, I appreciate you allowing me to do this because I think you're sticking on some points that we stuck on, because I was also on the committee that worked on the ordinance. And one of the things in reference to forestry is we felt that forestry is an economic entity, and that it was not addressed as such in the Conservation Commission from what we said. And it's important to look at forestry as an economic entity as part of a system within the community, not just the Ag Commission, but the Ag Zone, but as part of the community in terms of developing it, providing systems for it to be more, not just to make money off it, but to be looked at as part of a larger system around how we look at our community. So again, I think of that economic aspect to it that's not addressed. And in terms of the membership, one of the discussions that we had, I think Mr. Engler makes a very good point. An example of, say, the Rickers. They own property, they're farming the property, it's a large commercial enterprise, their influence may be such that because it's a commercial enterprise, not just a regular farming, it's bigger than just a farm, that there may be some undue influence there. They don't live in the community, but they do own a large business in the community that does, yes, farming is part of it, but it's also sort of value added, the work that they do. Is that helpful at all?
Yes, well, I mean, it just highlights that this discussion has been part of the discussion the entire time. So, yeah, thank you for the perspective.
I mean, I think we discussed these things in that group
Yeah.
also.
Thank you.
Well, and it's an interesting question if we want to change the purpose statement of the Ag Committee to include language around our local food economy or our local agricultural economy, and we're looking at forestry as an economic activity. Should it be folded into this vision, or?
I think they're so divergent from each other. It's, yeah.
So we would have to ask, require that that's folded into conservation? I just don't know how that process works.
We're being asked for our recommendations and our thoughts, right? We can't put every municipal official in a room and just have like a big round robin, right? So I think it would be chaos, actually. But so I think that we, quite frankly, can tell the city council anything we want to tell them with regard to this topic that is well within our purview. They have opened the door. If they do not want to hear what we have to say, they should not have asked us. And if part of what we want to say is that we believe that the Conservation Commission purpose needs to be revisited to strengthen their role in promoting and protecting natural resources and forestry resources, then I think it's well within our purview. And I'm going to go on a really sturdy limb by saying I think everyone at this board probably agrees that we think that that should happen.
I'm not certain of that. I think that if I'm tracking the discussion correctly, I think that we're trying to get a nice clean structure, and that makes sense. So we're saying, well, if this Ag Commission is for agriculture, forestry is a separate thing that happens in forests, that's in the Conservation Committee's domain, right? I don't know much about the Conservation Committee. I recall hearing in planning board meetings that it's not an organization with a lot of capacity and resources. And so one question I have is, well, we can revisit their purpose statement and mission, but would changing that language actually have an effect on the ground in terms of the Conservation Commission's support towards forestry and forest economy and forest lands and all that stuff? I think what we're trying to do is create a robust and capable, empowered commission that can really help promote this local economy, and we're saying that they're separate things, but I mean it's all what's happening out in the land, out in the ag zone. I mean,
I think the point is we said that this wasn't a commission for the ag zone. This was a commission for the city of Auburn to promote agriculture and the needs of the agricultural economy wherever.
And the needs of forestry, the forest land, the forest economy can fold into that mission in a clean structure as well. We don't need to kick that out into some existing commission that doesn't seem, from what I'm hearing, doesn't. What do we expect if we change the purpose statement of that commission? How are they going to support forestry in a way that's different from how they do it today?
Well, they'll have the purview to do so. First of all, they'll be asked to. And like with all boards and committees in the city, it's incumbent upon its members to, for lack of a better phrase, sort of push the issue. It's sort of, if you're given the authority to have purview over something, but you don't exercise it, whose fault is that? Is it because, I mean, I feel like it becomes incumbent upon them to say, okay, we've been tasked with this, and now, okay, it's not in the ordinance that you're giving us a staff member, but this is what we're asking for, and this is what we need. And
I guess my mind goes to resident Bill Sylvester, if I'm remembering the gentleman's name, who is an active forester. And I would just, if he were here, I guess I would want to ask him, how could some kind of city entity help support you in your forestry better? And I would try to envelope that perspective into the conversation that we're having here. I think I see your point that, look, they need, if it's in their purview, then they need to exercise that. But.
So I guess a slightly different lens that I put on this, and the reason originally that I was in favor for separating forestry from agriculture is, again, exactly the issue that you're talking about is capacity. So this agricultural committee, would it have capacity to do both forestry well and agriculture well? And if the answer, without staff, meeting monthly. So I don't really care as much about whether the Conservation Commission does that work on forestry, but does leaving it with this agriculture committee create a charge and a purpose and a set of duties that is not doable by that body?
I guess and as Holly said, that you look at farming. Farming is a use of a resource. We're using the land. Forestry is technically using land. Conservation is completely different. Conservation is you're conserving it. So I guess we could keep forestry in there because you are making utilization of the land, and I automatically thought of the tree farm out on Broad Street. So it is something that's planted, granted it's planted and it's not cut for 10 years, but again, it's harvested, it's replanted. So I guess, technically forestry would be part of the agricultural zone, although
I feel like Matt brings up a really good point, though. How do you ensure that capacity? So if you've got an agricultural commission, and if Bill were here, he would remind us that agriculture and forestry are very different from each other. As you pointed out, he would have said the same thing. He would have said, and as he said many times in meetings, the question for me would be, how would you ensure that the makeup would allow for that capacity? If there's only one person with any sort of ability or information to understand the forestry economy, I apologize, and forest products and managing forest land, will they be able to do that work? Maybe I don't know. It highlights something I think has been sort of like conveniently not focused on the idea that those two are very different. But
I mean, you can have a stipulation say that one or more members have some kind of experience or exposure to forestry, and whether it sits in this board or Conservation Commission, that capacity needs and expertise needs to go somewhere. So, but I agree with you, Brian, about it's an agricultural activity, a woodlot and forestry. I think the only piece for me that needs to come out is natural resources, because that is firmly within the Conservation Commission's purview.
yeah, and I would think that the composition of the board too would make it up. As Katie said, it's, we're designating who should be on it. You should have people that are farmers, you should have people that are public policy individuals, but you should have forestry people on there too, because forestry is a huge part of the agricultural zone. So,
all right, can I take a stab at this real quick? Can we say that, in general, our recommendation is that the purpose of the agriculture, see, now here's the problem, and should you call it the agriculture committee, but anyway. Should it be forestry and agriculture, but we'll leave that one for another. So the purpose of the agriculture committee should be to build stronger food, agriculture, and resource economies in Auburn, and to address the ongoing needs of protecting farms, farmland, forestry businesses, woodlots, local agriculture economy and local forestry economy. Like, we're going to roll all those together?
Protecting and promoting.
Yeah, protecting and promoting. Is that what I'm hearing?
mm-hmm.
Sounds like a lot, but I think if it.
Well, I mean, it does sound like a lot, but it's, again, it's basically an agricultural, you're talking about agriculture, whether it be forestry, and I guess that,
I would disagree. I don't think it's agriculture, but.
Well, Bill has worked in it much longer than I have, but I still look at it as you grow trees, you cut the trees down, you plant trees, you cut them down, you make use out of them. So again, it's no different than planting wheat. You plant wheat, it grows, you cut it down, you plant wheat, it grows, you cut it down.
It's a much more intensive use. It's like a totally different.
Well, it's only more of an intensive use because trees take 7 to 25 years to grow to a proper height before you can utilize them, so.
Right. Well, okay. Do we feel like saying that the purpose should encompass that idea?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to seek, we're going to go through. So that is our recommendation on the purpose. I'm going to seek a motion to approve the recommendation written on the screen here for with regard to the purpose. I know.
Sorry.
No, that's quite all right.
No, you're doing a great job.
I would make a motion that we accept it once she gets it typed up on the screen as it is written.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion. All those in favor? All those against? Okay, that's unanimous. With regard to the establishment, I think if we are going to say that this is for the entire city, that the committee established paragraph be amended to reflect that this committee is doing work throughout the city, not just in the Agricultural Resource Protection Zoning District, and that the regular voting members should all be,
So you have 9 members, 7 voting and 2 non?
well, let's see, where's that? Yeah, 9 members, 7 voting, 2 not. The 7 voting members should be residents. And that,
Non can also be.
right? But that must be residents, right?
The 7 must be, and the other 2.
The non-voting must be residents or landowners? Yeah?
Yep.
Okay. That the following, that it also needs to be amended to demonstrate that it's throughout the entire city, not just the Agricultural Resource Protection Zone.
So get rid of the 5 out of 9 need to,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think the terms of office, that's fine. Yeah?
What's the quorum for 7?
Quorum is going to be 4. So it would be the same as us. Only they won't have the associate members if someone is absent. So you could have 3 members absent and still have quorum. Although, if I remember correctly, when things like that happen, usually a unanimous vote is required. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Any feedback on the terms of office? Are you able to make that a separate
Yep.
paragraph? Yep.
Yeah. Point of clarification.
Yes.
Established consists of 7 members, 2 non-voting, appointed by the city council, 2/3 of all who shall be residents, and we know that that's changed, with the highest priority given in selecting 5 or more members who own land or are actively engaged. We're going to keep that.
No, I think that because they're not just in that zone. I think, I think that needs to be gotten rid of, and that's taken care of under the qualifications. I don't know how everyone else feels, but
I had made my notes based on keeping members that own land or are actively engaged in agriculture or forestry, but getting rid of in the Agricultural Resource Protection Zoning District.
Yeah, because it's not going to be,
But they're still engaged in agriculture or forestry, it just
Correct.
doesn't matter where
I
within
think
the
that's appropriate. yeah.
city.
Yeah, so we can get strike who own land.
Who are actively engaged in agriculture or forestry in
yeah, agriculture or
Auburn.
forestry, yeah, period, bang.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does anyone feel that something should be added or omitted from this recommendation regarding the establishment paragraphs?
We have discussed the idea that the appointments wouldn't all be made by city council. If city council is empowered to make all the appointments, then the appointments are made by the appointment committee of city council, is that correct?
Mhm.
And that's 2 council members, or 2 or 3 council members.
2 to 3. I think.
Well, they recommend to the council who's appointed. I
But the
think
council
ultimate
still sees the
decision
full
is the
slate, right?
council. Yep.
Yeah.
But they defer a lot of responsibility to that committee. They put some weight in their recommendations that they receive.
I can see where you're going with this, yeah.
So, well, question for staff. Are there any city committees that are not appointed in that way.
We do have a committee that is able to appoint an additional member on their own.
And some committees are mayoral appointments as well.
And it's not a.
So we do have at least one committee
Stamp.
that currently is able to appoint.
Well, that's a
One of
neat
their own
idea, because
members.
what if the 7 resident voters got to pick their potentially non-resident experts to be their wing people out there and educate them on the issues? Just a thought.
Yeah, 7 members, and that those 7 members have the authority to
Appoint
appoint
the
up
two
to two
additional,
additional non-voting members,
non-resident.
non-resident landowning members. I like that. How does everyone else feel?
Council appoints the 7 appoint the other 2.
Yeah, because really, they're appointing people that are non-voting members. So they're basically
to
choosing
them.
who
Yep.
they want to hear from.
Yep,
Which I think is great.
I like it.
We want it to be as many as two. They could elect to appoint none.
Yeah, I think it should be as many as, like, up to 2. Yeah. So if they, you know.
Did I butcher this enough, or?
I think that's great. Do we feel anything needs to be added or omitted? Let's seek a motion to accept this as our
Made.
second. All those in favor? Powers and duties? Look, I feel like we could go through all 11, and it would be a real slog fest.
What about qualifications?
Oh, qualifications, good call.
We're going to strike the 2/3 at the end of it and put all members of the committee should be, all voting members. All voting members of the committee shall be residents of the city.
Yep.
And we need to strike.
I really want to add to that list of involvement, skill, expertise, interest.
There you go. I know there was another word we talked about in the workshop.
And I remember specifically, I was looking at Mary Sylvester when I said it. She is someone who's got a deep interest in the watershed, but would not be qualified as an expert. Her profession was not as a hydrologist or lake biologist, but she's added tremendously to the discussion, and because of her deep interest, she's been able to educate herself and educate others. And so I distinctly remember that. I was looking right at her when I thought that.
Would her expertise be considered natural resource protection, though?
Well, this is what I'm saying. This was with regard, she's involved heavily with discussions of protecting the lake, around protecting the lake, right? And if you were to look at her qualifications on paper, she appears to not be qualified. However, she's been, by virtue of her interest and work that she's done, has qualified herself to be a very important member at the table when those discussions are happening.
She's also a farmer, but I see your point.
Well, I mean, yes, but she's not, okay, she's like a hobby farmer, right? So, I mean, right? So, like, that's been talked about. I won't bring that one up, oh my God.
There's no hobby with farming. If you've ever done farming, there's no hobby about it.
Amen.
No, and I don't mean that to belittle it. I don't mean it to belittle it. I'm saying, like, that's not her primary, not even close to her primary profession, right? So,
Yeah, I'm fine with adding the interest.
Yes.
I would like to strike wildlife protection or preservation, conservation of natural resources.
Yep.
Those are no longer part of.
yep. Good call.
Sorry, which one did you say you wanted to strike? Was it wildlife?
Starting at
Wildlife
wild.
protection or preservation, conservation of natural resources.
And the last sentence, right, which you already
Yeah,
did.
that's already down there.
All right, anything that you'd like to add? Okay, there's a motion, is there a second?
Yep.
All those in favor? Okay, that passes.
Where do we need to put information about requiring that we have somebody with forestry experience?
Oh, we should have put that, that's in qualifications or expertise in agriculture, forestry.
Right, but your concern was that
yeah.
if we don't have somebody who represents that specific interest, then we're not going to have that expertise. So how do we put that on here? One member must have experience? I mean, I just don't see if you have an interest in forestry that you can represent that voice.
It's going to be tough to say one.
Well, even if you put, you could say 2, 2, and 2, or whatever you wanted to say, but actually getting people to come and do it.
How are you going to determine that that one person meets that specification?
If they have experience in forestry.
So define experience.
They are foresters. They've worked for an organization that manages or promotes forestry, or, I mean, I think we have to be really clear, and I think that if we're concerned about who's sitting on that council, which others have expressed concern about, interest opens the door really wide. And if we're concerned about who's going to be sitting on this board to represent very specific perspectives, then we can't just say anybody who's interested. I know we just voted on that, but I think it's a concern.
I think that would go in the committee established piece. That would go up there. When we're discussing the 7 voting regular members, shall all be residents, with at least one having professional experience in an area directly related to forestry. Is that specific enough, do you think, Katie?
It was your proposal to have somebody who has forestry
Well,
experience,
I know, but you bring up the concern that the other language wasn't strong enough, so
well, we
I'm
don't
using
have
this as-
that seat, so I just want to make sure that that's carried forward if we do want to have this.
So I'm using this as the litmus test. The 7 regular voting members shall all be residents with at least one having professional experience in an area directly related to forestry.
And I would argue that if it's the Ag and Forestry Board, that we should also have one member that also has direct experience in Ag.
That's fine. With at least one having professional experience in an area directly related to forestry, and at least one having professional experience in an area directly related to agriculture. Okay. So we need a motion to amend
I make a motion that we amend the
the recommendation
the
regarding
committee
the
established
established.
recommendations to represent what is being typed up there now.
Second.
Discussion? No? All those in favor? Okay. Oh, man. We're in a bad time. We had blocked out 20 minutes for this. No, I know. We were really, we were like, yeah, everyone's going to agree. It'll be great. It'll be fine. We're going to go through this in 20 minutes. Powers and duties. Thank you for keeping me honest, Matt. Bringing me back to qualifications. I jumped the gun on that. Powers and duties. I will offer my personal opinion on this. I think that we could go through each one of those, and it would take a lot of time, and we would talk about adding some and subtracting some. The reality is, we want the powers and duties to reflect our recommendations regarding the purpose, the establishment, and the qualifications. And I know that that really is not specific, and that means that we have to be okay with someone else sort of deciding what that means. But in my mind, that's really what we'd be asking for at the end of the day. And I don't think, given that these are recommendations, these are not mandates, given that it's a recommendation, I'm not sure that going through each one of those is really the best use of our time if there's no mechanism to ensure that what we say wants to happen, we want to have happen, will happen. I think it really is in our best interest to make a recommendation that.
Just a recommendation. Like,
So
Right.
you're making a general recommendation that all the changes we've already made above, there's some logical flow.
Right. Yeah, and that.
I think we should quickly take a few minutes to sort of read through and see if there's anything else among the 11 points.
Well, and I would agree with it. Just on a quick basis, we already had said at number 1 that we're going to put promoting and protecting. And then after that, anything that has to do with conservation, we're just basically striking from the thing because we're not going to have them look at anything. And the only thing that I actually see is in number 2, where it talks about conservation and preservation.
We'd also talked about limiting, not limiting the scope, but having a more realistic scope.
So, actually, on the conservation and preservation in that number 2, aren't those modifying agricultural lands? Right, so we would want to actually keep that. Because we're
Because that means
conserving.
like, don't blow up all the agricultural lands and turn them into subdivisions, for instance.
For example.
Yes.
So it's directly talking to agriculture, not conservation writ large.
Right, it's the conservation and the preservation of those agricultural lands. I see your point.
Okay, I see.
So you don't want to strike it?
I'm
I
good
do
with
not
leaving
wanna-
it. Yeah, I'm good with leaving.
Yeah, I do
Okay.
not want to strike it. Not that I speak for the board, that's just me personally.
One thing that's not included in here, but just trying to be reflective of the current process for the ag zone ordinance proposed changes, is that currently, as it stands, the city council is looking at a 40% income threshold, and that any desired residence to be built on plots between 3 and 10 acres goes before the planning board for review and needs to provide a farm plan. Now, setting ourselves up, or this board up, for success in the future, do we have the skills necessary to review farm plans, or do we want the agricultural commission or committee to review that and provide a recommendation to the planning board?
We can certainly ask them to do that, even if it's
Yeah.
not.
I mean, it's a moving target. That's the best knowledge that we have right now of that process,
Well,
but I think reflecting it would be.
Well, that's why I would hesitate, is that, I'm actually not so confident, having watched the last council meeting, that the 40% is necessarily where they'll land. So I hear your concern. I just, I think instead of trying to mandate that the planning board be responsible, we need to hope that the planning board will be responsible and say, we are seeking your opinion on this in the same way we went and sought the Conservation Commission's opinion, even though we were not asked to do so by the council. We said, oh, well, this is clearly in their purview, and these are the folks we need to talk to. In the same way the same way that we ask any other experts and resources to come and talk to us.
Well, I think that makes it incumbent upon the current members to make sure that the process is appropriate, but we could just provide the recommendation that says, should the ordinance language require that, building and site projects be reviewed by the planning board, that it be reviewed also by the ag committee. I mean, we can make the recommendation, like you're saying, these are just recommendations to offer. They don't have to accept it, but I think it's worthwhile to consider. I just don't think if we're given a farm plan, what would we do with that?
Yeah, I actually agree with that. If
Well, then would it be reviewed by the ag committee first and then processed through to the planning board?
That would be my suggestion, yes.
yeah, I mean,
Then there's going to have to be language in here about
When,
how they do it, and
well, we were going to have, we discussed that last time.
Right.
Part of the issue with this, and I fully agree with having an agricultural committee, where do they fall in the hierarchy? Because we get stuff, and as we heard tonight, we have a time frame as stuff is brought forward to us. So should the plans be submitted to the agricultural zone or the agricultural committee, blah, 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 first before they come to us for a decision? They can get their opinion and they can give it to us as consideration of what we will be doing, because otherwise they're going to be a resource that in technicality we would never use, because let's face it, when we get a thing, we don't have time to go, okay, well, we'll wait for their meeting and then we'll have another meeting behind theirs to try to do this. So we have to figure out exactly where they're coming in at
Yeah, I
be
guess,
able to have this work at all.
so,
Or even going to become a change to the ag zone in any of our lifetimes.
well, so to that point and to Katie's point, I think we don't want to, we want to recommend that the city council not codify a workflow that sends farm plans to the planning board
Prior to its
In the-
submission to,
if there's an existence of an agricultural committee. That makes no sense, right? So codifying a workflow is to me, is a problematic approach, right? So
well, yeah,
I think in this note that we send to city council, we can make that recommendation that we don't codifying.
And should it really only be in the ag zone? I mean, this is
No.
this is not supposed to be an ag zone committee.
Exactly.
So it should, if we are really going to move forward with this, then this committee should be reviewing those farm plans for any special exception.
Right,
use-
absolutely.
Yep. And
For any special exception farm use anywhere in the city,
If one is required, right, Eric?
you know, if it's required. I mean, I still not sold on it, but, yeah.
So I don't know where, there's no place else in the city where we would see a residence as a special exception that has to be tied to a farm plan. Most zones would allow a residence to stand alone. But the current draft of the ag ordinance changes that will go to the council for workshop on the 18th does start to shell out a process where the ag committee would provide a recommendation to this board on that the applicant has provided a farm business plan that appears feasible, and if implemented, will meet the definition of a farm. That the proposed lot can reasonably accommodate the plan, that the individual parcel can reasonably accommodate the plan. The applicant has demonstrated a commitment to the proposed farm use, and the proposed residence will be accessory to farming. So
Does that only
that's-
come to us if it receives a favorable recommendation, or is the process described similarly the way we provide recommendations to the city council, which is, we provide them, but
So and this is a draft, this is still going to the council for a workshop and is completely subject to change based on that feedback, but the process, as I see it written here, if we got an application, we would go to the ag committee, get a recommendation, and that would be part of the staff report essentially. That would be available as part of the planning board's review when you receive the application.
I think Matt's point is important, that however they choose to shake that out, they need to make sure that the workflow that they're creating doesn't cause undue burden for their applicants or the board or city staff.
And that process, just to clarify, is for those non-conforming 3 to 10 acre lots.
Right, only.
Over 10 acres would not follow
be an
the same
issue.
process. It would still be a permitted use if they met the income standard.
Right, so we're not talking building projects, we're talking special exception.
House is proposed accessory to a farm on less than 10 acres.
I mean, I guess it's broader, that if there is a farm plan required for any project that would come before the planning board for review, that it's considered, that the agricultural committee has the opportunity to review and provide recommendations.
That's a much better way of
Outside of
saying
ag
it.
zone, outside of anything. But if there's a required farm plan for any project anywhere in the city, that we're not the ones who have to say whether it's, make a determination without any feedback.
And we shouldn't ever codify that a specific group has to look at something. That just, I don't know, because then it becomes,
Well, we do that for
We do
planning
that
board
now.
now, yeah.
Right, like city can't, the council can't make a change to chapter 60 without us having provided a recommendation first, right? Like, the difference being that the council's not working on the same timeline we are.
that's really different than someone with a farm plan, right? I mean,
You've written that in the form of a question. Should any project?
Should any project in the city require the
Should any
submission?
project, oh, I apologize.
Of a
I didn't
firm.
read far enough. There we go.
Sorry.
No, that's my fault.
Shall require their review. Shall review the firm plan.
Okay, guys, I'm looking at the time. And we started going through the committee shalls. Okay? Are we going to continue to do that? Or are we going to take the broad approach that the council needs to take into account that the powers and duties, that we feel that powers and duties should reflect the recommendations we've made with regard to purpose, establishment, and qualifications, and that the council consider the scope of the work they're asking the committee to do and whether or not it's reasonable. We could go either way. We can do a broad one, or we can go point by point. But we're at 9 o'clock.
I would support going broad, but with the specific example that we just provided about the review of farm plans be included as part of the recommendation.
Yeah, I'm
And
fine.
I think if it helps with the comfort level, number 11, if the council passes an ag ordinance change that does designate duties to this board, you'll have another shot at those at your December 10th meeting. December 3rd, we're going to
Yep.
talk about, actually, to see if there is a possibility for a special meeting, sorry. But the board will be tasked with a recommendation related to those.
How do we feel about this recommendation regarding powers and duties? Is there anything that someone would like to add or omit? Seek a motion to accept this as the recommendation for that section of this text.
So moved.
So, motion to my left, is there a second? Oh, I'll go. Second here. All those in favor? Okay.
Can we do the wave sometime, guys?
I don't, yeah, right. I don't think that, in reading through the rest, I didn't see additional, I think the rest of it's good. I don't know how everyone else feels. All right, so Megan, either I can do it or you can do it. I'm expecting us to send a letter similar to the one we sent regarding the proposed ag zone changes, in which we wrote what our proposed recommendations were out. And do you feel comfortable drafting that, or would you like me to draft that?
I will use the language I have here and
Okay.
draft it and have you sign it as the planning board chair?
Well,
or-
before I sign it, can you please send it to the board, and then I would ask
Absolutely,
members of
yeah.
the board to send a reply, sender, any feedback for things that you see. And then I will sign it sometime next week. Okay. Great.
Sounds like
Well, unfortunately, folks, we've hit 9 o'clock. So in order to go on to any additional business, it requires a unanimous vote of the board. I think that before we make that vote, are there specific things that staff needs to discuss in the miscellaneous?
just a few things. Yeah.
Okay.
It'll be like 2 minutes.
We covered old business.
Do we skip public comment?
No, we don't. We covered both 8 and 9. So I will seek a vote of the board to continue with items 10 and 11. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Votes unanimous, so we'll open it up to public comment.
Holly Lasagna, 220 West Auburn Road. I appreciate all the amount of time and energy and thought you've put into this. It's clarified things for me, who has spent time on the committee and also with the council looking at this. I think you've making some very good recommendations. One thing I just want to note is that the idea of having the non-voting members who must be residents or landowners, we might want to think about that. I don't know where we would, just because, for example, owner of Ricker Farms or somebody who is from the state who might be a non-voting member who can give us information. And the other thing I want to mention is the farm plans are pretty standard, and Eric, you can mention this, Karen Scammons, who says that there's a farm plan that is a basic sort of template that people can use to fill out, so it's not going to be extremely complicated in terms of considering that. But again, thank you. I appreciate these. I think you're making very good recommendations.
Thank you for your comments. All right, there are no other members, so I will close the public comment section. Under miscellaneous, Megan.
Yes, so just one thing to hand out. It looks like, let's see, upcoming items for December and January, public hearing on possible draft ag resource protection language, continued public hearing on the solar ordinance recommendations, continuation on North River Road. We did receive the Broad Street Wellington Court apartments that was tabled a few months ago. They're now looking to put 18 apartments on that property, so you'll see that next month. And let me see, I have my list here somewhere. There's a number of planning board members that are up in January. I think Kyle, Matthew, and John are up this year. And because I guess you were fulfilling the appointments of prior members whose 3-year terms were almost up. So I think Sue is going to be reaching out to everybody to recommend that you reapply, but just something to keep in mind. Also, we'll need to elect a co-chair at some point now that...
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So, because I'm actually still an associate. A bunch of people got seated in front of me, I think because of my failure to apply in a timely fashion or something. Is there an open seat right now for Sam? Or
Yes.
There is. So
Yeah.
can I apply right now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I would recommend, yeah, yep.
I'll do that. Thanks.
Yeah, and yeah, you'll have to elect a new co-chair to replace Sam as well. And there'll also be, unfortunately, Brian and Katie will be leaving us, so there'll be the potential for at least 2 more seats.
Why did you say that like it's a bad thing?
to be filled?
Well, you pointed out that you've run us off.
What? What? Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. Like, look at this
I
guy.
think
We
it's
gotta get
gonna
out of
be-
here. Yeah.
It's going to be incredibly helpful to have 2 members of the council, though, that have sat here as planning board.
Definitely.
Yeah, particularly during this process, it means there's not that huge learning curve again, and it means you have perspective from a land use policy with regard to this that I think few councilors have. So.
And yeah, I think the last item is there's the potential for a public hearing for a special exception for the expansion of Edward Little High School in January or February. I know there's been conversations internally.
The expansion. You mean the new high school, not an expansion?
Sure. Maybe Eric can expand more on that one.
I'm not liking that.
I haven't really been part of that conversation, so.
That's changed a little bit. Maybe you haven't heard about the changes to that project.
Yeah.
No, it's a new high school. It will.
Okay.
We'll have a chance to review that at a planning board level soon.
That's all we had, so.
All right.
I do have one other thing that I wanted to include under that item. There's a process being shelled out that would allow the current sitting city council to make a decision on the agricultural zone ordinances before the potential inauguration on December 16th. That would require that, and I don't know for sure that the 16th is the inauguration, but I don't think it'll be any earlier than that. That would probably be the earliest date. So it's being finalized, I guess, and you'll probably get a request to have a special planning board meeting on December 3rd. What that would do is allow the council to have a first reading on December 2nd and hold a public hearing, planning board to hold a public hearing on December 3rd, and then the results of both of those would end up going back to the council at a second meeting in December, whether that's shortly before December 16th or maybe on December 16th. But we'll be sending a request out to board members this week to see if you're available for a meeting on the 3rd, it looks like.
Since elections are on here, we do need to elect a co-chair or an assistant chairperson next month. I think our voting is in the first regular meeting in February, so that way appointments can be made in January, if I remember correctly. But also to that end, I've served 2 years as the chairperson, and I think it's really important to sort of build capacity. And I think it would be a shame that someone could serve for 3 years and have the same chairperson for all 3 years. You know, like someone could literally serve one term. If I were to say, let's say I chose to run again, and let's say I were elected, so all hypotheticals. It would also hypothetically mean that it'd be possible for someone on the board to have only experienced one chairperson, which I think is not good for building capacity. So I'm not going to be doing it again. So if the folks that are sticking around, okay, are interested at all, please send me an email. And I've spoken to city staff. What I'm going to do is, folks that are interested, we can't all go together. We can go, like, I can bring one other person without it being an illegal meeting. But sort of rotate and take turns going to the monthly staff meeting that I have with them before the election, so that people that are interested can get a handle on sort of what the duties and responsibilities might be outside of the meeting, so they can get a good idea if it's still something that they'd like to do or not. So if that's something that interests anybody, let me know. We are on to item 12, adjournment. Is there a
I was
motion?
going to say there's an item 12. I wasn't
There is.
prepared for that one.
Adjournment. There's a motion, second. All those in favor? Excellent. Everyone signed it. Yes. Everyone already signed it.
Yeah, everyone signed the
It was fine
final.
to skip those, I thought.
Thank you for listening to Chair.
Oh, thank you.
I got
I've been talking to
Calendar?
Audrey about it.
Need a calendar?